Good morning to you. May I please ask you to raise your hand if you can see me? You've got a button to raise your hand, please. Thank you very much. That just confirms that you can actually see and hear me. So therefore, I will begin. And I'm now going to again share my screen and return to the PowerPoint presentation, which I'm going to use. Welcome, I'm Sir Tailor. You'll learn something more about me during this presentation early on, because the things I'm going to tell you are things that you won't necessarily learn elsewhere, and you need to know something about me in order to understand where I'm coming from. I am going to be using this PowerPoint presentation. It's really just to make sure I don't miss out anything important that I need to tell you about. And I'll also share a few anecdotes. And there are a few video clips also, which I think are useful. And they're all from YouTube, so they're public property, and you can find thousands more like them if you search for them. There will be a Q&A after I have finished my formal presentation. And the whole thing, including the Q&A, will end by 1 o'clock. So I'll try to keep my presentation down to less than 2 hours. You might think, what can I talk to you about for 2 hours? You'll soon see. In the Q&A, you have the chance to ask me anything you like about preparing a child towards 11 plus. And I will do my utmost to give you some useful guidance, some useful input. But if you start asking me about exams for specific schools, or the admissions policies for particular schools, or their catchment areas, things like that, those I don't know off the top of my head. But all of that is public information that you just go to Google and you can find, and I can show you how to find the information that you need. I do recommend that you stay for the Q&A if you possibly can, because I always find that, yes, as interesting as my presentation is, the Q&A is always more stimulating, more interesting, because it's your thoughts, your queries, what's on your mind. And that's always very interesting. And just like when I teach a group of children, the other children within that group learn from the questions that one child has asked. And it's the same principle here, that another parent may think of a question that you wish you'd asked, you just didn't think of it. So it's very enlightening anyway. I hope you'll stay for it. So you're here, and I'm really pleased that you are. Thank you for coming. Why are you here? Now, I'm not questioning your right to be here. I'm really pleased about it, but you must have a reason for it. Now, of course, with so many of you out there, there are a variety of reasons, but I hope that you all have something in common, because my presentation is based on some sort of an assumption about why you're here. And this is my assumption. You're here because you want to do your best for your children or your child. This is my basic assumption. And of course, if that isn't why you're here, then this presentation isn't going to do much for you. But if your reason is, as I have assumed, then hang on to your seat, because you're going to really get a very interesting set of insights. Now, one of the things that I said about this presentation is that it would draw attention to or highlight top 5 mistakes parents make re 11 plus, and it will. I'm going to address those 5 specific things as an item a bit later on, but I think that as I go through the presentation, you will realize some of the things yourself. But this is, if you like, a clue of what they could be, because what these are the kinds of things, they're not necessarily exact quotes, but the kinds of things that parents do say to their children. Get a good score. Try to be more like your older brother. Be a good girl and finish your work. You must go to a grammar school. Answer quickly. Don't worry, you get it from me. I'm terrible at maths myself. So all of these things that parents say to their children with good intentions, trying to motivate them, trying to encourage them, trying to reassure them, trying to console them, and so on. They seem fine, they seem positive, but actually they're not, or they can have negative repercussions, even dire repercussions. And I think that by the time we get to the end, you'll hopefully will think back to some of these things which I have said to my daughters, and you may have said to your own child too, and think, wait a minute, I have to be a bit careful when I say this. And you do. So then it brings us to the next question, which is, why am I here? Why I'm here? I'll tell you this, because I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher, and I believe in education, the power of education. And having been in the 11 plus industry for the last 20 years this month, what I see is a lot of families, a lot of children and parents getting very frustrated and suffering unnecessarily. And of course, I myself experienced the same frustration. And a lot of that frustration is because children work ever so hard in order to try and prepare well for these exams. And their parents work ever so hard towards the same end. And I work ever so hard towards that same end. And then we all get frustrated because it doesn't seem quite to work. And very often the reason is because of a lack of education of parents. So in other words, the education of parents would make a world of difference to this whole endeavor. And that is why I am here, because in order to educate parents about 11 plus, you're welcome. So in another way, to share my expertise and insights with you in order to empower you to make better choices for yourselves and your children. That's why I'm here. Now, some of the things that I share with you today, you won't necessarily like. You might not agree with that. They might be in conflict with things that you already thought you knew. But I ask you to bear with me, because the things I'm going to say, some of them are not things that other people are prepared to tell you. And that's because they're too busy trying to take your cash off you. So they'll tell you the things you want to hear. They'll reinforce the things you already believe. And that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you, if you like, the genuine information, to give you actual insights. And therefore, I'll end up contradicting some of those things that you already think that you know. So I am going to share some important insights. Some of them might sting at first. I ask you that you reflect on them, and then therefore your children might reap the rewards. You too, of course. So give it some time to sink in, and you have the opportunity to make more informed decisions and choices for yourself and your child. Now, to begin with, there's this video clip from YouTube called "You Are Not Your Feelings," because many people do actually identify with their feelings. It's a short clip, I'll just play it now.
It's also important to remember that you are not your feelings. One of the most important things that you can learn from this book, and more importantly for life, is that you are not your feelings. Your feelings are there to give you an example of how you could react, but that doesn't mean you have to act in that way. So remember, you do not have to act on your feelings. When you understand that your feelings are just suggestions for how you could act in a situation and not what you have to do, you will become unstoppable.
So you are not your feelings. Now, straight away, this is a really valuable lesson, not just for us parents, but for us to teach our children, because children are especially prone to identifying with their feelings, and they have the greatest difficulty separating themselves from their feelings. And many times they will react to a situation with their immediate emotion or feeling. And I think that if they can begin to understand that their emotions, their feelings are just feedback, and that they are not the decision. That's an important point. So straight away. But of course, this presentation is aimed at you. So I'm saying you will also experience feelings or emotions at some of the things that you see and hear today, but that too is just feedback. So since I'm going to essentially trash a lot of what you think you know about 11 plus and preparation and tuition and so on, why should you heed me? Why should you take any notice of what I say, even if you don't like what I say? Well, I am motivated to educate and not buy profit. For example, we teach in small groups because this is most effective for learning, but bad for making profits. And we teach in groups with a limit is 9 single figures, because we have this, what I like to call the Goldilocks range of between 3 and 9, which is the best range for small group teaching. Well, 3 to 10, but our limit is 9. And that is very effective for teaching and, more importantly, for learning. And that's why we use it. But it's terrible for making profits. And that's not what we're about. In fact, we do not run for the purpose of accumulating profit. We run for the purpose of providing the best education that we can. And that, if that isn't reason enough for you to want to heed what I say, I don't know what is. You'd probably leave now. I can therefore tell you what you need to know in order to be able to make better choices. And I'm not going to tell you what I think you want to hear. And I'm not trying to essentially pull the wool over your eyes. So who am I to be telling you these things? Who is Sir Tailor? So a little bit of personal information about me and my background. My name is actually Sudhir, but 20 years ago when I started this business, I thought, oh, I know what? I'm going to call myself Sir, which happens to be a contraction of my name, and I'm a teacher. I was born in Kenya, and when I was very young, went to India, and then when I was still quite young, 7 years old, came to this country. So I am an immigrant from India. Actually, I'm always curious, so I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Would you please raise your, oh, we've got a couple of hands up already. Would you please raise your hand if you also are an immigrant, if you were not born in this country? Okay, we've got quite a few actually, well over half of you. All right, keep your hand up now, but if you are child of an immigrant, please raise your hand. Okay, well, you know what, that's 3/4 of you. Okay, so you know that that's a special status, and it's not quite the same as the general population, if you like. I am dad to 2 girls. This is very significant to me because you're all parents, and I'm trying to tell you that I have been in your shoes. Now, whenever I mention my girls, I feel obliged to prove it almost. And these are my girls. Kavita on the left, she's doing her final year at York University. And Nilam on the right, she's currently working as a journalist for The Guardian. So back to who I am. I'm an immigrant. I'm a dad to 2 girls. I've been a teacher and trainer since 1985. Since that time, 10 years of that period was actually in the Royal Navy as a trainer within that force. I've taught this 11 plus course since 2001, April in fact, so it is 20 years this month. I estimate, though I've never kept count, that I have personally taught between 10,000 and 20,000 people over this 35-year career. And not least that I try to do my bit to make the world a better place for all of us and for our children. So there in a nutshell is who I am. And I feel that is what you need to know about me in order to heed what I say. I hope that is sufficient. So I'm driven by a vision, which is to empower people like you and your children by enhancing their love of and skills in learning and reasoning. I believe in the power of education to improve the world and people's lives in a small way. I'm a modest person, Are you serious about doing your best for your child? Well, I know you are, because you're here. Unlike the millions of other people who could have been here but are not. So I know you're serious, but I want to make a point here. You may have heard of Carl Sagan. He was a scientist, and he was actually in his life the world authority on the search for extraterrestrial life. And because of that, his opinion was very much sought. He was constantly asked by reporters, is there life out there? Are we alone in the universe? And his answer would always be, I don't know. The jury's out. We don't have clear evidence one way or the other, which of course is the scientist's answer. It's the thinking man's answer. It's actually the right answer. But it's not a very satisfying answer, especially if you're a journalist looking for a good story. So this is exactly the question he was asked, and that was his answer, that we don't know, the jury's out, we don't have enough evidence one way or the other to be sure. And the journalist, just looking for a little bit of a headline, prodded him saying, but what does your gut tell you? And this was his answer. But I try not to think with my gut. If I'm serious about understanding the world, thinking with anything besides my brain, as tempting as that might be, is likely to get me into trouble. So a very good-natured, good-humored way of saying, you know, your gut isn't actually a thinking organ. And I'm saying to you, I know you can have a gut reaction to things, an instinct, a feeling, if you like, but really, that's not the place to be doing your thinking. Learning, you're going to learn some things today, and learning requires some mental work. I mean, it's important to have an understanding what learning is, because learning is really what I'm all about. Learning consists of thinking new thoughts and creating new pathways in the brain. So in essence, learning requires thinking new things and creating new pathways in the brain. Some new thoughts can be in conflict with some old thoughts. So in other words, you have to kind of unlearn things sometimes in order to learn things, and that you resolve such conflicts by reflecting logically as opposed to with the gut. Because how else can you decide which thoughts are better? Okay, now this presentation is in 4 main chunks, 4 main parts. In order of importance, mind management, number 1. Now you can see that I've written mind management in a large font and it's high up the page. That is to indicate how important it is. Then mindset is the second bit, and it's in a slightly smaller font and slightly lower down the page to indicate its relative importance. Third, perspective. And then last of all, you can see by the size of it and how low it is on the screen, that compared to those other things, the importance of 11 plus stuff. Effective mind management, yours and your child's, is critical to your child's flourishing. What is mind management? Well, let's see. I've got a couple of questions. You can't answer them, but not to me anyway, but you should answer them to yourself, okay? Because then you'll probably get a little bit more from this section. Question 1, what are some of the things that you do that you know you should not do? Or things that you avoid doing that you know you should do? Just think of something. It can be trivial, it can be big, it can be personal. You don't have to share it, okay? But think of something. I can think of something. I think that I watch too much TV. Basically every evening I sit down after work and I park my derriere on the sofa and put on the box and watch Netflix, and I vegetate. So I'm thinking, you know what, that's not, well, there are some benefits to it, but it's probably not the best use of that much time, and I could probably find better. That's an example that I think of, but you think of your own. All right. Then a slightly harder question to answer. Why is it that you sometimes don't do what you know is the sensible thing to do? So why is it that choice you're making of what to do is not a great choice? Okay, have a little think about that. Now, third question is, who is your biggest enemy? Well, at this point, some people would be thinking, well, it's me. I'm sabotaging myself. I'm making poor choices in the knowledge that they're not good for me. Oh, I'm a terrible person. And then you might want to beat yourself up. But I'm saying don't beat yourself up. You're not a terrible person. And you might say, oh, I'm just a human, but you're not. You're not just a human. That's the point. You are not your biggest enemy. It's your own chimp that is your biggest enemy. Which is really great news, isn't it? Because it's not you. It's not you that sabotages yourself. So that's the good news. Here's the bad news. If you're unaware of your chimp, then you're in trouble. Because it's doing things, making choices for you without your knowledge. So what is this chimp? Well, actually, this chimp is a mind management model. So there isn't an actual chimp, of course. The chimp lives in your head, but is not you. Okay, now this all sounds a bit mysterious, unless, actually, can I see a show of hands again? Anybody who has read The Chimp Paradox? Anybody who has read the book called The Chimp Paradox? I see, okay, just one hand, all right. Well, then here's a revelation.
There are 3 core tenets to the book. You have a chimp and a human in your head, and they want very distinct things. Your human is a simplified representation of your prefrontal cortex and some other parts of your brain that handle long-term thinking, delayed gratification, emotion control, consideration, and ethics. You also have a chimp in your brain. This is the limbic system and all the older parts of your brain, the parts of your brain that we would have had more in common with a chimp. Steve Peters separates out these parts of the brain and says that they want completely distinct things. They have entirely different motivations. And if you don't understand this and fail to put them in their appropriate places, then you will be forever in conflict within your own mind. This book is extremely simple. It has no flowery words or high concept ideas. It's plain and simple, to the point. You've got 2 dudes in your head, a chimp and a human. They are in conflict. You need to sort out that conflict if you want to have a happy, healthy, long life. And there is great, great power in this simplicity. Anytime you find yourself being overly emotional, reactive, sad, scared, you have to realize that your chimp is acting up. Anytime you feel hurt or jealous, it is the chimp that is in control. Realize that you are not your chimp. The chimp is like a child that you must always look after and that will never grow up. It will always remain the chimp, and you must accept it as it is. Don't control and hate the chimp. Manage and love the chimp. This requires you to listen and give it what it needs. So if the chimp is frightened, you don't just go, shut up, or ignore it, or berate it, or anything like that. You don't ignore your emotions. You don't ignore what your body is telling you. Instead, you listen, and then you find the most logical, rational solution to the problem. You must be a problem solver. And if you don't find solutions that appease the chimp and make the human happy, you will be forever miserable. If you don't make the chimp happy, if you ignore it or try to trick it, then it will take over. Your chimp needs sex, it needs a tribe, it needs love and security, and it needs territory. And you have to give it these things, amongst other things, to avoid internal conflict. You must satisfy its needs, keeping check on it like you would with a small, scared child. If you do this, then it will behave. By separating out the parts of your brain and giving them identities, it allows you to distance yourself from the more base, reactive parts of your mind, and thereby love yourself more. Where once you might say, why the hell do I always get so angry over such small, silly things? I'm such a goddamn loser. You now say, Why does this get your back up? And how can we make sure this happens less in the future? What do you need, Jim? I mean, you might or might not say it in a weird fake American accent. This acceptance of all aspects of yourself is pure liberation. The vast majority of people are completely ruled by their chimps, and they don't even realize it. This makes them act in an angry, petty, possessive, egotistical way. If you keep an awareness of this, then when people act out, it allows you to have more compassion, empathy, and patience with them. You can say, hang on a second, this person is clearly ruled by their chimp. Sure, they may be doing me wrong, but far better to have some slight I can bounce back from in 3 seconds than to have an unruly chimp who is on the clock 24/7, causing mayhem and terror and destroying one's life.
So there is a brief introduction to the chimp mind model. And as he did say at the end, that if you are not familiar with your chimp, it's probably making important decisions for you and your family. I mentioned this book, The Chimp Paradox. Since most of you haven't read it, I'll just hold it up to the camera. This is what the front cover looks like. It's called The Chimp Paradox, Mind Management Model by Professor Steve Peters. This is such an important and useful idea and model that I actually issue a copy of that book to the parent of every pupil on the 11 Plus program, because it's part of education for parents. If I'm only conducting lessons for the children and giving them work and marking it, I'm not addressing half of the what needs to be done in order to prepare children. So educating you, the parent, is the other half, and I'm doing that today, and I do that during the program too.
There are 3 core.
So who is in charge? So you have to think that, oh, okay, there's this chimp or parts of my brain which behave like a chimp. And then there's part of my brain which is the human, the if you like, the higher functions, the more noble aspects of who we are. So who's in charge, you or your chimp? Fortunately, you know, it's very easy to tell. But, you know, when the human is in charge, you think you've got the noblest motives and that you're a good person and you're acting in the interests not just of yourself, but others around you too. And this is how you think of yourself. You're in charge. And this is actually, a lot of the times, who is actually in charge? A chimp. So how do you know which one? How can you recognize when your chimp is in charge? Well, look at this. Take a minute just to read what that says. So on the left, of course, green, good, is the human. These are the ways that humans think. When it comes to making any decision or choice, good ways to make decisions. You ask things like, why is this important? So let's take the situation you're in now. You're thinking about 11 plus, putting your child forward for 11 plus, perhaps giving them lots of preparation towards 11 plus tests. So then you would ask, why is this important? And then you'd give it some sort of an objective answer. What are the facts? Now, as you all know, we're absolutely swamped with facts. We can get endless facts on basically any topic. And that it can be bewildering. So another question we ask is, which facts matter the most? And of course, we have to filter the facts. So we do it logically. Which facts matter most? And that's a lot to do with values, of course. Which decision makes the best logical sense? So these are the ways that the human, the thinking person in you, makes decisions. On the other hand, on the right, we have the chimp, bad ways to make decisions. The chimp looks around. What are other people doing? How will it make me look? Meaning to others. What will people think? What do my urges say? So in other words, your chimp is in charge when you're looking at the reactions of others. You're looking at what are other people doing? How will it make me look to other people? What will other people think of me if I do this or if I don't do that? And what do my urges say? Which of course is your gut, your feeling, your emotion, which is feedback. It is not you, it's not your identity, it's just feedback, which you can take into consideration as a human when you make your decisions. So this is it. This is how you tell whether you're in charge or your chimp is. It's according to the way you're thinking about the issue or the question. Okay, let's come to the idea of goals now. This is important. No doubt you have goals, we all have goals. So think of 1 or 2 goals that you have. Okay, now again, it can be small, it can be big. I mean, it can be, in my case, something as trivial as I aim to shed 4 pounds over the next 2 months, for example. That's my goal, that's my goal. Okay, so something like that. Think of a goal that you have. Now let's think about goals and success. So we would normally say, well, if I achieve my goal, then I have succeeded. So if I achieve my goal of losing 4 pounds over the next 2 months, then I can say, oh, I have succeeded. I have achieved my goal. So you might, some of you might be thinking things like this. Certainly some people I know do. Getting your child into a grammar school seems like a sensible and noble goal, doesn't it? Or getting your child into a particular grammar school, especially if they already have an older brother or sister in that school. That's surely success, isn't it? Well, wrong on both counts. Neither of them is a good goal. I'm going to explain why. So right now, if your goal resembled those goals, you might be thinking, what do you mean, Sir Tailor? Wind your neck in. That's your chimp, by the way. How dare you? Whereas you're human, the thinking bit of you is intrigued and wonders, why is he saying that? Where is he going with this? What's he going to lead on to? Okay, well, here's my Rosie story. So Rosie's come up on your screen in pink as a reminder to me to relate to you the anecdote about Rosie. So as I mentioned, I started this 20 years ago, and 20 or 19 years ago now, it might have been in my very first year. Yeah, so about 20 years ago, I had this pupil called Rosie, and she used to come to class with a friend. So their families were friends, and the girls used to come to class together. And that class I used to run on a Sunday morning in Langley Pavilion, which some of you will know. Anyway, the 2 girls used to come to class, they were collected together and so on. And they did their 11 plus at the same time. Now, at the time I lived in Slough, and I used to do my weekly shop at what used to be the Co-op. It no longer is. And whilst doing my weekly shop, I saw at the end of the aisle Rosie's family and Rosie, and when they saw me, they came up and greeted me, and they were obviously quite joyful. That it came across in their whole expression, and they were very glad to greet me. And the father came and shook my hand, and he shared the good news that Rosie had gotten into the grammar school that they had chosen. I don't remember which one now, but one of the ones in Slough. And they thanked me for my efforts, and I could see that they were totally delighted. And I was really pleased, and I felt a bit satisfied that, oh, right, the work I've done, it's kind of brought this kind of joy. And so I carried on shopping after that. And at the end of the aisle, I saw Rosie's friend and her family, and they appeared to have had a death in the family, because they were looking down, and the father's complexion actually looked physically grey to me, and they were walking quite slowly. And so I went up because I thought something's wrong. I went up and I greeted them, and I'll tell you what was wrong. I'm sure you can guess that their daughter had not passed the 11 plus. And this whole charade was because of that. And I thought to myself, what a ridiculous reaction to a score in a test, as if there had been a death in the family. I mean, what were they thinking? What about that poor girl? She must feel like such a failure. What are the parents thinking, reacting like that? And I thought to myself, I can't be part of this. I have to do something about it, because that is ridiculous. It is not life and death. And that's when I resolved that educating parents is part of it, because this is a classic thing that parents do that damages their child. They turn 11 plus into a do or die thing, a pass or fail thing, success or failure. And then that's how they paint it. And then if they pass and go to grammar school, it's like, hooray, well done, you're a worthy person. And if they don't pass, it's the exact opposite. And I think you cannot put your child or any child in that position of believing that this is a judgment about them. Even if they do happen to pass, then when they pass, they think that their validity, their value as a person is based on the fact that they passed. Don't do it. Well, then what is success? Well, it depends who you ask. Is it wealth? Well, a very wise man once said, your health is your real wealth. And aren't we all seeing that? Haven't we all come to that realization in the past year and a bit? Or is it happiness? I always like looking at this picture because I think it's so true to life. And I remember being that boy. Two things prevent us from happiness. One, living in the past, and two, observing others. I think there's a lot to that. Well, let's talk about sensible goals now. Here's a little clip.
The book is also great because it talks about how to set effective goals. Because a lot of the time, if you set a goal and don't reach it, you'll feel disappointed with yourself. But there's a way you can avoid this disappointment, and that's by setting a goal that isn't controlled by external factors. For example, you could set a goal of getting a job, but there's no guarantee you're going to get it. However, what if you change your goals to reading up on the job, learning interview techniques, and how to act the part? If you don't get the job, you can still be happy because you achieved your goals and maximize your chance of getting.
Okay. This is about the goal of getting a particular job. In fact, getting a particular job is not in your control. That's why setting the goal of getting that particular job is not a sensible goal, because it's not in your control. Now, you might think, but it is in my control because it's up to me how I do in the interview, how good my CEV is, how well I research the company, how well I present myself. Yes, all of those things are in your control, and those are sensible goals. If you look on the left side, read up on the job, learn interview techniques, how to act the part. Those are sensible goals because they indeed are in your control. But I'll tell you what is not in your control, whether or not you get the job. Why? That's because that decision isn't made by you. That decision is made by somebody else. Usually by a panel of people, or usually though, one of whom is the most influential person. Now, you may have done all that you could do, and you may have done it all correctly. And on paper, you might actually be the most suitable candidate for the work. None of those things guarantees that you're going to get that job because the decision is made by human beings. And those people who interviewed you and looked at your CV and checked your references and so on, they are prone to biases and prejudices without even necessarily realizing it. And even if technically by objective means, as far as you can apply objective means to the situation, you might be the best candidate. They may choose somebody else. It's up to them. So this is not a sensible goal, to get a particular job. And for the same reason, getting through 11 plus or getting a high score in 11 plus or getting into a particular is not a sensible goal because it is not in your control. Now, you might think it's in your control. You might think, oh, I just need to throw lots of money at it. I just need to send them to Mr. Tailor or some other tuition company. I just need to put them in for lots of mock exams. I just need to buy loads of resources and get them lots of tuition. But actually, that's like reading up on the job, learning interview techniques and acting the part. Yes, you can do all of those things. Those things are in your control, but the outcome is not. Because the outcome doesn't depend directly on any of those things that are in your control. They depend on your child's performance on the day of the exam. And I'll tell you what's worse is that it depends on the performance of all the other children in their cohort. Now, you might think, oh, no, but it is in my control. It's in my child's control. I'll make sure. Well, you can't. I'm going to tell you another anecdote to illustrate why you can't. I had this pupil called Nikhil, and this was in about 2002. And he did really well in school. He was one of the top pupils in his primary school. And even on the course, he took it in his stride. That is my 11+ course. He took the course in his stride, and he was clearly cut out for grammar school. There's no question that grammar school suited his learning needs. And therefore, I was really surprised when the results came out and he'd missed it by 1 mark. So this was for the Slough grammar schools, and he'd scored 110 when the pass mark is 111. It was then, and it still is 111. He got 110. And I was flabbergasted because there were other children who were less capable than him, who did less well on the course, who worked less hard, who had actually passed that test, and some of them with flying colors. So I was a bit mystified until I spoke to his mother, who explained to me that it was her fault because on the way to the exam, she had said to him, in order to try and motivate him, that don't worry, just do your best. And after the exam, we'll go to Thorpe Park. That was it. That did it. Because he's a 10-year-old boy. And the thought of going to Thorpe Park was pretty exciting. So all the way through the exam, that's where his head was. So you can imagine the excitement of 10. It's not something you do every day, especially 20 years ago. And the result was that he missed by 1 mark. And I think it's quite remarkable that under those circumstances, he actually only missed by 1 mark. He obviously was very capable. The good news is that she appealed, and because of strong support from the school, she must have made a good appeal, his mother, he actually did get into grammar school. So the appeal was upheld, which is not a frequent thing. Anyway, the point is, again, it's another example of something that a parent does, which is a mistake. So of course it's done with the best of intentions. She was trying to motivate him. She was trying to get him to do his best on the day when the performance actually counts, and the only day when the performance actually counts. And she ended up shooting him and herself in the foot. There's a lot of that goes on with 11+, and that's really what my presentation is about. It's to help you to avoid those pitfalls. I'll tell you another anecdote. It's actually about me. When I'm getting slightly ill, I'll tell you what my first symptom is. It's not that I feel feverish. I don't notice a change in temperature. That's not my first symptom. I don't get a runny nose. I don't start sneezing or get itchy eyes or aching joints. Those are not the first symptoms for me. I'll tell you my first symptoms is I have difficulty remembering my times tables. That is when I think, wait a minute, something's not quite right. Either I didn't sleep properly or I'm getting ill. So for me, when I have difficulty remembering my times tables, it's a sign that either I didn't sleep properly or I'm getting slightly ill. That's the first symptom. Now think about what that means. This means that on the day of the exam, your child could be getting ill, showing 0 other symptoms except their ability to focus on what's in front of them. And that is going to drastically affect their performance on the day of the exam. And if you think you can control that, you're deluded. In fact, your child's performance on the day of the exam can be affected by a million things that are completely out of your control. Of course, there are many things that are in your control. You can maintain a normal routine the day before the exam, make your child comfortable, go to bed at a normal time, get up at a normal time in order to try and make sure they get a good night's sleep and so on. There are many things that you can do to help your child. But there are a million things that are out of your control that will affect your child's performance on the day of the exam. Literally, something that somebody said in the exam room can affect them. Something that they heard on the radio, something that was on TV the night before. A million and one things that you just cannot anticipate or control. And that is why it's not a sensible goal to set, because you're setting your child up for a fall. And also, even if your child gets through and you get the outcome that you desired, it's still a harmful thing, because your child thinks that they're successful because they achieved the goal, and that's the reason why. Not sensible goals. So how to measure success then, if not those ways? Well, this is Professor Steve Peters, the author of the Chimp Paradox. He says, measure success in life by effort and doing your best. Then it is in your hands to succeed and be proud of yourself. So in other words, sensible goals are goals where you are in control, things which are within your control. So in my own example, I chose the goal of shedding 4 pounds in weight over the next 2 months. Actually, that's not in my control. You might say, surely it is. No, it is not. I'll tell you what is in my control: how active I am and what I consume. Those things are in my control. As to what my body does, well, it's too complex for me to manipulate as simply as managing what I eat and how active I am. Sure, in the long run, there's a very strong correlation between what you consume and how active you are and whether you gain weight or lose weight. But over the next 2 months, I can't be sure that managing what I eat and how active I am is going to result in me shedding the 4 pounds. So in other words, a sensible goal would be that this is what I'm going to eat, this is how I'm going to eat, and I'm going to do this much activity. Those are sensible goals because those things are in my control. Okay, that's the end of the section on mind management, the most important thing by far. So we come to mindset, which is next in importance. Your mindset, you the parent, can help or hinder you in striving towards your potential and your child in striving towards their potential. So your mindset is a really important thing. Mindset, here's what I think is a very good video from YouTube, which is a nice introduction to it.
Do you have a growth mindset? How do you think of intelligence? Do you think you're born with a certain level of intelligence that you can't change much? Or do you think it's something you can work on to develop and grow? Many students think that their level of intelligence is fixed, that they can't do much to change it. This can lead them to feeling that they just aren't smart enough to succeed, especially when courses get more challenging. But what if you knew that no matter who you are, through effort and effective strategies, you can develop your level of intelligence? According to Stanford University psychologist Carol Dweck, how we think about our brains actually affects how well we learn. Dweck says that people generally think with one of two different mindsets, a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset believe that their intelligence is fixed at birth and they can't do much to change it. People with a growth mindset believe that their talents, abilities, and intelligence can be developed in different ways. And you may feel like you have a fixed mindset in some ways and a growth mindset in others. For example, you may think with a fixed mindset that you're just not a math person, but you may adopt a growth mindset with writing, music, sports, or another discipline. In fact, scientists who study the brain have found that the brain is like a muscle. It changes and grows in response to what we do. The harder we work using helpful strategies and the more challenges we face, the stronger and smarter the brain becomes. This is because the brain is made up of cells called neurons, which are connected to each other. As we learn, the number of connections between our neurons also grows. As we continue to exercise our brains, the connections between our neurons grow as well. These new and stronger connections help to make us smarter. Scientists call this concept neuroplasticity. Research shows that students who adopt a growth mindset, who believe that their brains can grow and develop through effort and challenges, actually do better in school. For these students, the goal is not to prove what they already know, but rather to learn and grow. Students with a growth mindset view challenges and mistakes not as proof that they aren't smart enough, but as opportunities to become smarter. The good news is that you can develop a growth mindset. You've taken the first step by learning about some of the science that shows you can grow your brain. The next step is to consider your mindset. If you have some areas in which you think you aren't smart, challenge yourself to learn and grow. Why should you bother? Because if you learn to develop your mindset, you'll persist longer with problems. You'll take on harder challenges and stretch your mental muscle more. You won't be as affected by setbacks, and in the end, you'll learn more. And the effects of changing your mindset can stick with you for years, since you're training your brain to think in a new way.
You might be aware that schools, primary schools, secondary schools, and other educational establishments have really embraced this concept of the growth mindset because it's so powerful when it comes to children's learning. Now, don't blink. You're going to like this one because what you praise really matters.
So check this out. Carol Dweck and her colleagues wanted to look into the impacts that praise had on children's development. So what they did is they took over 400 fifth grade students from all across the nation, and they did a really simple yet interesting study. Here's how it went down. They gave all the kids a really, really easy nonverbal IQ test. There were 10 questions, and at the end of the test, they praised all the children in one of two ways. The first group was praised for their intelligence. So they said, wow, great job. You must be really smart at this. Now the second group was praised for their effort. So they said, wow, great job. You must have worked really, really hard at this. Now this is a really subtle difference, but the impact it had is incredible. So after praising the kids and getting them divided up into the two groups, they gave them all an option for their next test. The first option was, hey, this next test is going to be a little bit harder, but it's going to be a great opportunity to learn and grow. Now, the second option was, this next test will be similar to the first, and you will surely do well on it. Now, the interesting thing is, out of the group that was praised for their intelligence, 67% of them chose the easier option, while 92% of the kids who were praised for their effort chose the harder test. This is unbelievable to think about, how just the subtle difference in the way that they were praised had such an impact. Carol Dweck explains why this happens.
Child or adult hears, oh, you think I'm brilliant and talented. That's why you admire me. That's why you value me. I better not do anything that will disprove this evaluation. As a result, they enter a fixed mindset, they play it safe in the future, and they limit the growth of their talents. Whereas focusing on the strategies they use, the way they're stretching themselves and taking on hard tasks, the intense practice they're doing, those are the kinds of things that say to a child or an older athlete, it's about the process of growth. As a result, they don't feel, oh, if I make a mistake, you won't think I'm talented. They think, oh, if I don't take on hard things and stick to them, I'm not going to grow.
Next, Dweck and her colleagues gave all the kids a really, really difficult test. It was one that they would surely fail, but they wanted to look at how the different kids attacked this challenge. Dweck noticed that the group that was praised for effort worked harder, longer, and actually enjoyed this test more than the group that was praised for their intelligence. This group got really frustrated with this test and had the tendency to give up early. After this artificially induced failure round, all of the kids were given a third and final test. Now, this test was the same level of difficulty as the first one, but check out the results. The group that was praised for their intelligence actually did worse on this test than the first one. Their average score actually dropped by 20%, while the group that was praised for their effort did significantly better, raising their average score by nearly 30%. This is a 50% difference in performance that was caused by a few subtle differences in the way that they were praised. This study shows how praise can either make or break a child's development. I mean, we all do it. We all want to be positive with the children we work with. So teachers, coaches, parents are always looking for ways to support their kids and tend to praise them quite a bit. So we need to look at research like this and realize, okay, praise is a good thing and there's nothing wrong with being positive, but we need to be very careful about praising someone's intelligence or abilities and focus more on the process and the effort that they put.
So you see the difference in the way that the two groups of children were praised was literally what the narrator said. One group were told, oh, you must be really smart at this. And it was said in a casual passing way. And the other group were told, oh, you must have worked really hard at this. Again, in a casual passing way. And it made a 50% difference just once, saying it just once in passing, casually. So now you think your mom and dad, think about the impact that the things that you praise has on your children. And here in this screen, there's don't praise intelligence or abilities, do praise the process and effort. I want to point out that you really need to read this book, Mom and Dad. It's called Mindset, and it's by Professor Carol Dweck, who was speaking in a little clip within that clip. This book too, I issue to the parent of every child on my 11 Plus program because it's so useful, so important, so powerful for their learning. So there's more to it than just this. And something that is important to add to what is on the screen is don't praise intelligence, abilities, or results, meaning scores or traditional outcomes, passing and failing. Don't praise those things. Praise the process and the effort, doing the right things in the right way at the right time. So if they're doing the right things in the right way at the right time, what more exactly is it you're expecting of them? It doesn't make sense to praise anything else. So that was mindset. Now we come to the third part of this presentation, which is a realistic perspective. So we've done mind management, mindset, and now we're going to look at perspective. A realistic perspective on your part allows you to apply your energies where they really count for your child. Because for sure, I come across and have come across many parents over the last 20 years who have put lots of effort and energy, but exactly in the wrong place, and neglected to put effort and energy where it would have made such a difference to their child. So for this, I have a question for you to consider. Who's your greatest teacher? I'm not going to ask you, but just who comes to mind when I ask that question? Now, there'll be a variety of responses. Normally, when I see that question, instinctively, I jump to a couple of my teachers at school when I was in secondary school, who I remember fondly. And I think, you know what, they did inspire me somewhat. And but you have your own ideas. Okay. Now, to try and get to my point about who is your greatest teacher, let's consider this. What knowledge, beliefs, and abilities were you born with? Well, you wouldn't remember, obviously, but You're a parent, so you've seen it in your child and of course in other people's children. They're actually born with no knowledge, no beliefs, but certainly abilities. I mean, abilities other than bodily functions. Abilities, we have this fantastic, we humans, that is as a species, have this absolutely wonderful ability to learn. We're born as learning machines. And that's the only ability that we're born with. No belief, no knowledge, but abilities to learn. Huge ability to learn. That's what we're born with. And we do. And that learning that we do begins very long before we ever see the we have any contact at all with formal education, obviously at home. Now, to try and put this into perspective, I'm going to look at the number of hours in a week and look at where a 10-year-old would typically spend how they would spend their hours in a week. 7 days times 24 hours is 168 hours in a week, of which a child would typically spend in term time 30 hours in school. They might in a week go to tuition of various sorts for 3 hours. They might spend 56 hours, maybe 60 hours, maybe a little bit more than 60 hours sleeping. And they would spend a few hours doing other extracurricular things. Now then you think, well, how many hours is that? 56 and 30, 86 and 3, 89, maybe allow an extra 10 hours, maybe up to 100, might be up to 100 hours. You might even be up to 110 hours. Doesn't that leave an awful lot of hours when your child is at home, not in school, not sleeping, not in tuition, not doing extracurricular? Where are they? What are they doing? Well, I'll tell you. They're with you at home, under your care, under your influence. So from that, you might think, oh, right, so it's our parents then, our greatest teachers. Well, you're close. So who's your greatest teacher, really? Well, we do spend a lot of time under the care of and under the influence of our parents, true. But we spend a lot more time with ourselves. In other words, we're with ourselves in our heads 100% of the time. Each of us is actually our own greatest teacher. And that goes for your 10-year-old child. After that, it is in fact our parents. Why? Well, apart from the fact that when we are children or we're in their home, we spend a great deal of time with them and we look up to them, looking to them for guidance. What happens is that the people who are around us within the first few years of being born, we learn our mind management from them, because we newborns, what do we know? Nothing at all. So whatever mind management is being modeled around us, that to us is what is normal and right. Likewise with mindset. So whatever mindset is being modeled, practiced by the people around us, we learn that and we adopt that, because what else would we know? And of course, we also learn who we are, our identity and our place in the world, or our perspective, because of the treatment that we get from the people around us. So in other words, they really shape the way we think, the way we process, and the way we see ourselves in the world. And then what happens is when you do go to school, eventually, nursery, infants, juniors, and what have you, our whole experience and approach to that is shaped by how we were trained when we were very young, before school. So because our parents shape all of those things, they also shape our experience of formal education. Now, for our parents, after that, our children are our greatest teachers because of a number of reasons. I'm going to go through them. First of all, they remind us what it is to be curious, because sometimes when we're grown up, and we've got lots of responsibilities and we're working really hard and trying to juggle everything, what have you. We're just so busy trying to make ends meet and get things done that we don't have time to be curious and educate ourselves. But our children, they're just forever, why this, what's that? They're forever curious. So they remind us what that was like. They also question the things we prefer not to have to justify. As I just explained, of course, we're all very busy and have a million things on our minds, and our children are pestering us with these questions, and they want us to justify things that we say and things that we do, and we just don't have the energy all the time to do that. But they do question things, and they do make us think it through again, and then sometimes that's very useful, because sometimes the things that we do, actually, we are not able to justify to ourselves. This is really important. They remind us how ignorant we once were and how far we've come. We can remember a time when there were many things we know now which seem really obvious to us that we just didn't know, we didn't understand. Even basic concepts to do with numbers or, or with language. I mean, things like, for example, your times tables or how to do long multiplication. We didn't always know those things. We were born knowing nothing. But at some point during our childhoods, we learned those things. So it doesn't take a great deal of imagination to take ourselves back to a point when we didn't know that thing either. And that should be very comforting to you, because what happens is if you think in that way, that there was a time when I didn't know this, there was a time when I thought, oh no, that's going to be too hard for me. And now it just seems so obvious. We've gone through that process of being ignorant to now it being really obvious and simple. Well, if we've done it, that should give us comfort and reassurance that our child also can do it. They just require the opportunity, the patience, and the support. So it helps us to be more understanding and patient with our children if we remember that. We were once completely ignorant too. And very importantly, they're not cynical about the world. I'm not saying that you are, but I know many people who are. Many adults do become cynical about the world. It's not inevitable, it's not necessary. It need never happen. A lot of it is down to you as parents. And that it can be a lesson to us when we see our children and they're not cynical. Okay, so the flourishing of your child at age 10, who has the power, if you like, the influence over your child's flourishing, your 10-year-old's flourishing? Well, I'd say it's 50, 40, and 10. So if you think of them as the percentage of the flourishing. So who has the 50%? Well, think of it, when your child is born, they have no influence, no power at all. They're completely helpless. So 100% is with the parents. The outside world has very little to do with it. Then as they grow, they have some contact with the outside world, and they have contact with formal education. And then, of course, their own influence increases as they grow. So their own influence goes from 0 when they're born to about 100% by the time they're in their 20s. By the time they're 10, though, their own influence, on their own power over their flourishing is about 50%. By the time they're 10, which is the age children are, of course, when they sit there 11 plus, the vast majority of them are 10. 40% is still though with you. I mean, it started off as 100% is in the hands of the parents, but by the time your child is 10 years old, it's down to 40%, leaving 10% for the rest of the world. So the rest of the world, a small part of the rest of the world is formal education, including tutoring. Now, this is a really important perspective. It's really important because naturally you would understand that the industry that I am in as a tutor, many parents behave as if their whole child's future is in my hands or the hands of the tutor, and the choice of tutor is the thing that's going to make the critical difference, when in reality, the choice of tutor or the tutoring company makes maybe a 1% difference at most. And typically, those same people who think that or express that idea are the ones who are have a great deal of capacity for improving the up to 40%, which is in their control. Simply reading the Chimp Paradox and mindset pretty much doubles what proportion of what you could be doing you are doing. So this is the healthy perspective. Parents bust a gut on the wrong thing. Of course they mean well. They're trying to do well for their children, aren't we all? But if you don't have this perspective, you put your energies where they don't make, and then the point of that is that you end up neglecting to put your efforts and your energies where they would have made a huge difference to your child. So this healthy perspective is a big deal. So in short, about the healthy perspective, neither the academic flourishing of your child nor their flourishing as a person, a human being, relies on which school or which university they go to, much less which tutor they have, who was the teacher. That's all chimp stuff. So, I'm not saying that schools aren't important, and I'm not saying universities aren't important, quite the opposite. I'm an educator. What I'm saying is that there are other things which are vastly more important, and they're in your control and your child's control. That's what I'm saying. Pay and absolve. Right, what do I mean by pay and absolve? Well, look, I've never been particularly interested in motor mechanics, nor knowledgeable about it. So when something goes wrong with my car, by the way, I don't have one now. I got rid of it in January, and I don't miss it at all. But when I used to have problems with my car, I'd think, oh, what a pain. I better take it to the garage. And that's what I would do. And the garage would say, okay, we'll take a look at it, Mr. Taylor, and we'll give you a call to let you know what it is and to give you a quote. I say, okay. They give me a call. They say, oh, yes, Mr. Taylor, this is worn out. This is broken. That needs replacing. And it's going to cost this much. Do you want us to go ahead? And it's always, yes, please. And they say, call me when the car is ready. I go and pick it up. And they say, your card, please. This is how much it is. And they take the payment. And I say, thank you very much. Sometimes they even show me the broken part that they took out, and I think, yeah, whatever. I think, yeah, I'll just take your word for it. That is the part that you say it is, and that did in fact come from my car. I mean, how would I know? So in other words, what I'm doing is I'm paying the mechanic, the garage, to fix my car, and I'm absolving myself of all responsibility for it. I'm just saying, you're the professional, you do it, and I'm happy as long as my car's running. Pay and absolve. I do the same thing if I have a problem with my computer. I'm not a techie, as you might have already worked out. So if there's something wrong with my computer, I take it to the computer repair shop, and same situation. And I just say, okay, whatever it costs, this is, off you go. And they fix it and I'm happy. I just pay them to do it and I absolve myself of all responsibility for it. Pay and absolve. But you can't do that when it comes to your child, not when it comes to your primary school child's learning. You cannot leave your primary school child with a tutor and leave them to it, because at this age, the overlap between parenting and teaching is too great. Remember, they're only 50% responsible for their own flourishing. You're 40% responsible for their flourishing. And if I am put in that privileged position of being responsible for your child's learning, am 1% at most. And I'm glad to have the chance to be that. But your involvement is so much more important for your child's learning than mine, for reasons I've explained. So you can't pay and absolve. Your child needs you to be involved with it, with this process, with the learning process. It really isn't like leaving your car at the garage or your computer repair shop. Though some parents do say, well, look, Mr. Taylor, here, I've paid you the money. Now I'm expecting my child to pass. That's a bit naive. Right. I know you're here because you want to do your best for your child. So you want the best for your child. I hear this expression actually from parents, those exact words. I just want the best for my child. Well, if you do want the best for your child, then there's something here to think about. In that case, don't compare. Don't compare them to any other person. Not to you, not to their granddad, not to their uncle, not to their sibling, especially not to their sibling, not to their classmate, not to somebody in the media. Don't compare them to anybody else. Why not? Comparison is unkind. It's often manipulative. Of course, it's intended well. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Most of the things that we do as parents have good intentions behind them. Not necessarily good outcomes, though. And it stifles the human. Because it's actually an appeal to the chimp. The only person you should try to be better than is the person you were yesterday. And that is the message that you want to be giving to your child. They're not trying to emulate another person. They should be trying to better themselves compared to what they were yesterday. Say, for example, if your child does not now know their 9 times table, then in a couple of weeks, when they do know their 9 times table, say, look at how far you've come in the last 2 weeks. I remember only a fortnight ago, you didn't know your 9 times table, and look at you now. Because of course our children were born knowing nothing, and they know vast amounts now. They know huge amounts. Take the opportunity to remind them of the time when there was something they didn't know or didn't understand or could not do, and then show them, and now look at you. To show them their capacity for learning and how far they have come. That it also reinforces their belief in how much further they can go and in their ability to learn. So comparison, what's wrong with it? Isn't your child a worthy human being in their own right without comparison to another person? It's a rhetorical question. Of course they are. Right, back to, so you want the best for your child, the best for your child. This time the emphasis is on your child. Well, what is best for your child depends on who your child is as a person, separate from all other people. If you want the best for your child, then you need to know and respect their aptitudes, their natural inclinations. What do they like? What are they interested in? What are they good at? And value them for that. Can I just see a show of hands again, please? Do we have any doctors in today's audience? We normally have 1 or 2. I'm not going to say anything offensive. I'm just always curious because we do have quite a few on the parents of children on the program. Okay. Actually, can you just put your hand up if you can hear me? Because I'm not sure that there wasn't any response to my previous question. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for confirming that. But no doctors today. That's fine. I don't mind if there are. Or if you're a doctor, and you don't want to say so, it's okay. No, the reason is this. Within the tradition that I was brought up in, and maybe in the tradition where you were brought up in, you will recognize this if you were brought up in one of those, that as soon as a child, however young, shows any academic aptitude, the talk within the family is, oh, she's going to grow up to be a doctor. Oh, he's going to grow up to be a doctor. This is it. I faced it when I was very young because I was quite academic, and you may have faced that yourself too. It's actually a tradition in many, many cultures. So the problem with it, there is a problem with it, huge problem with it. And the problem is not that being a doctor is no good. No, being a doctor is a wonderful profession. Aren't we all grateful to them? And I certainly am. But the point is that not every person is cut out to be a doctor. Not every child who is academic is cut out to be a doctor. They may be competent if they do it, but it's not who they are. If you're interested in your child's flourishing, then you have to be interested in who they are. What are they interested in? What would they find most fulfilling? So the problem is, if you plant the seed in your child's head that they're going to grow up to be a doctor, because that's what they've been hearing as long as they can remember, then guess what they say back to you when you ask, or anybody else asks them, oh, what would you like to do when you grow up? They say, oh, I'm going to be a doctor. And they think it's their idea. And because they say it often enough, you begin to think it's their idea too. And then they grow up to be a doctor, and then they wonder why they're not happy. And you wonder, why aren't you happy? Well, I'm telling you now why. Because this seed was planted in their head, which did this. Look, I'm sorry that this is particularly bawdy and in your face, but the reason is because this is the most important thing I'm going to tell you today. And I don't want you to miss it. There's no danger of that, right? But it's a long sentence, and I've broken it down into little chunks, and I'm going to explain it to you, not because I think you're stupid, but because I think the message is so important and it's easy to miss. Your child's desire to please you. Now, sometimes you might not believe they have a desire to please you, but they do. Your child's desire to please you can mislead you into believing that they want what you want for them, causing you to make choices that undermine their flourishing as human beings. Okay, so I'll read that one more time. Your child's desire to please you can mislead you into believing that they want what you want for them, causing you to make choices that undermine their flourishing as human beings. So if you want the best for your child, that has to loom large in your head. Don't be planting seeds in their heads. You might be trying to plant seeds. Again, it's one of those things parents do in the best interest of their children. And it actually ends up undermining their child, prevents them from flourishing. So be wary of wishing your child or trying to turn them into someone they are not. You cannot do that without stifling your child's true self. Now, sometimes what parents are doing, some parents, is they're trying to get their child into a grammar school, forgetting that grammar schools are not a suitable place for every child. But their child has to go to a grammar school. Why? I'm sure some of you can think of reasons which are not necessarily in the interest of the child. Well, who are they suitable to then? The expectations and workload in a grammar school are appropriate for children who have high academic potential. Of course, over the years, I've come across many children, literally hundreds of children who've been through the program who are not, or who do not have a high academic potential. How high? Well, that's straightforward. It's no secret. That's public information about the top 25%, the top quarter, the 75th percentile. Grammar schools suit the learning needs of about the top 25 most academic children. That's who grammar schools are for. Now, you might think, yes, but what's the harm if I really push my child and somehow get them into a grammar school? Well, I'm going to tell you. If they are not academic and they're in a grammar school where the vast majority of children in their class are highly academic, they're going to be ending up bottom of the class all the time, every subject. And you might say, oh, but still they're learning a lot because they're in a grammar school. Yeah, they're learning, all right. I'll tell you what they're learning. They're learning that they're dumb. They're learning that they have no value. They're learning that they're the butt of jokes. They're learning that they're the ones that get laughed at, looked down on by their classmates. Nobody has to actually say anything. They know, your child would know that they're the bottom of the class because they would be desperately hoping that somebody else is going to score lower than they did. And what's going to happen is their self-esteem is going to be absolutely shot. They're going to be reduced to thinking very little of themselves. Who wants that for their kid? Who thinks that's a good idea? Please don't put your hand up. Nobody thinks that. No caring parent thinks that that is a great environment for their child to be in. No, it is not. So if your child is not particularly academic, grammar school is a horrible place for them to spend the rest of their childhood. So for other children, grammar schools are likely to be overwhelming and damaging, to put it mildly. Okay, so grammar schools are not for every child. They're not a good place for every child. That's the end of the section on perspective. Now we come to 11 plus stuff. Now let us assume that your child is particularly academic. You have good reason to believe that because of your own knowledge of them and because of how well they do in school, and from reports you get from their school teacher, everything reinforces that they are particularly academic. Great, I'm your man. Because if a child is particularly academic and grammar school would be suitable for their learning needs, I am your man, because I spend my professional life preparing children for that test. But when I ask parents and children actually, what's important, what's most important about preparing for 11 plus, I get back stuff like, oh, it's exam technique, it's speed, it's the vocabulary, it's the doing mock papers, it's where you have to know the exam format, you have to know the patterns of the questions. And my face dropped because I think, no, none of those things are anywhere near being the most important thing when it comes to preparing for 11 plus. So what is then? Wakey, wakey. Because this is what it's really about. This is what's really important. I call it the 3 L's. The 3 L's. You know, at schools, in primary schools, they teach you, or used to teach you, the 3 R's, which was a little bit of a cheat actually, but because it's reading, writing, which is not an R, it's a W, and arithmetic, which is an A, but reading, writing, and arithmetic. So that's a cheat, but I've got a genuine 3 L's: language, logic, and learning are the queen, king, and ace when you're preparing your child for the 11 plus. Okay, language, logic, and learning, the 3 L's of 11 plus. You know, people do get hung up on this, but I patiently explain to them, is the exam CEM? Is it GL? Who sets the exam? What's the exam pattern? How close is the mock exam to the real thing? People get a bit hung up on that kind of thing. And they ignore the 3 L's. Why do most grammar schools disclose that information then, i.e. the name of the organization that sets their exam? Why do they give that information if it isn't really, really important? Why do they disclose the outline format of the test papers if it isn't really, really important? I'm telling you why. Because it isn't important at all, because it's trivial. They give you the information because it's trivial to preparing your child for the test. Not because it's essential, but because it's trivial. Whoever sets the test, CEM, which is the Center for Evaluation and Monitoring based in Durham University, and GL, which is Granada Learning, those are 2 of the most popular suppliers of 11 plus tests to grammar schools. But there are many others, and some grammar schools actually set their own tests. But the point I'm making here is that it doesn't matter who's setting the test. What matters is what is it that's being tested? What is the underlying knowledge and what are the underlying skills that are being tested? Because accumulating that knowledge and those skills is what the preparation is. Then it doesn't matter what's the format of the exam, how many questions are there, How many mock exams do you do? All this. And that's all trivial. That's why they tell you. So let's come back to what is actually tested in 11 plus tests. Of course, they vary around the country. Some have more subjects, some have fewer subjects, and the mix of subjects can differ. But this is the overview. Literacy, reasoning with language, knowledge of and skills with British English. So when I said language, it is specifically British English as opposed to American English, Indian English, Australian English, South African English. There are many forms of English. The one that is used in the 11 plus and the one that children are being tested on is British English. This is about 75% of the 11 plus test. Now, this is any 11 plus test, whatever subjects they have. How can I say that? I'm going to tell you. Most 11 plus tests, though not all, also test numeracy, reasoning with quantities, knowledge of maths, skills with number, problem solving skills, and spatial skills. That is non-verbal reasoning, things to do with shapes, things that doesn't necessarily require language skills. Reasoning with shapes, knowledge of shapes, observation, spatial ability, spatial skill. Now, so if those are the papers, how come it isn't 1/3 literacy? I'm going to tell you why. Because normally the English or verbal reasoning paper is weighted at 50%-ish. So straight away, if there are other subjects, they're weighted at normally a maximum of 50%. Okay, so then you say, well, that gets us to 50%. So why do I say 75% of the test? I'm going to tell you now. Because 50% of the mark in maths are for English, because the questions themselves, the information is given in English. There may be a few questions which just have numbers in them, but for the majority of questions, they are embedded within the language in English. And when children struggle with maths, often it's because they actually struggle with English, with comprehension, not understanding the information that's being given to them, or sometimes not understanding the question that's being asked. And therefore, at least half the marks in maths are for English. There we are, we're up to 75% already, more or less. But there's more to it, because even in the non-verbal reasoning paper, all the papers, all the instructions are in English. All the spoken instructions given by the invigilator and on a recording on the day of the exam are in English. So all the instructions are in English. The questions are in English. In order to excel in maths, you have to excel in English. And that's why English is about 75% of the 11 plus test. And therefore, by far the most important subject. So if you want to bust a gut and you want your child to bust a gut preparing for 11 plus, it's English where they need to put their biggest effort. Of course, the ability to understand and follow instructions, English. And speed does come into it because there is a time limit. And that's a design feature of many 11 plus tests, that the children need to be efficient in their methods so that they can answer enough questions. They won't necessarily answer all the questions. No child is expected to actually answer all the questions. And of course, ultimately, what a test is measuring is the ability to perform well in tests. You can never get away from that. So what is it that's needed in order to prepare for a test like that? Well, children need access to an excellent syllabus, obviously, which teaches them the things that they need to know, and they need to be taught well. Well, on my programs, you may or may not know, I actually do all the teaching. Because I'm the person best qualified to do it. I am, after all, the course author, and I have been in the teaching profession since 1985. And I've been dedicated to that profession for all of that time. So I do all the teaching, and I record myself doing the teaching, and then your child has access to my teaching, so directly from me, as many times as they want. And what's just as powerful is the fact that you have access to 100% of the teaching. 3, they need to ask and be asked a lot of questions. In other words, it needs to have interaction. They need feedback and guidance on their learning. Somebody who is able to tell them what they understood well, what they have not understood that well, and what they can do about it. And by the way, that's really only possible in a small group. To be able to know, to pick up what a child is struggling with, what they've what they've improved at and to actually comment and guide them. It requires a small group. They need suitable practice and resources. That's a commodity. Anybody can get hold of endless resources for 11 plus. They need someone to turn to when they have questions, and they need your support. And you need someone to guide you in how to support your child's learning, for which I and my colleagues are at your service. Okay, since English is by far the most important subject, what can you do to improve that? Well, you can't learn English in a classroom for a start, because it's a language, and a language is too complex, too sophisticated, and too big to be sitting down and trying to learn the way you might learn how to do long multiplication. No. So the way to improve mastery of English is not by going to lessons. What children could do, though, which is really useful, really convenient, really easy, is to do lots of daily reading. Read daily from a variety of sources, a total of at least 30 minutes, preferably an hour a day when there is no school. It sounds like a lot, or it can sound like a lot. It isn't. Because I myself read on average about an hour a day, and I'm quite busy, but I fit it in. I don't set aside an hour. I just say, okay, I can read for 5 minutes here whilst I'm doing this, or I'll have a little break and read for 5 minutes here, or 10 minutes there. And by the end of the day, ooh, look, I've exceeded the 30 minutes and I'm getting on for an hour's reading. Okay, a variety of sources every day, up to 30 minutes to an hour. That, reading resources are plentiful, varied, cheap, or even free. What a wonderful thing. That the thing that children most need to learn, the resources for it are all around. Read a mixture of fiction and non-fiction. Non-fiction, we'll come to that. With fiction, read different genres and different authors, because they need the variety. I mean, of course, it's fine. Everybody has favorite authors. It's fine. So read your favorite author, but make sure you're reading a different author too, and a different genre. These days, children seem to be mostly reading fantasy, thanks J.K. Rowling, and humor, thanks David Walliams. But it's not enough for them just to be reading fantasy and humor all the time. They need to vary it. And also not only reading modern literature, but also some classic literature. So a really great mix, as varied as you can make it. Because what happens then is that they're being exposed to a great variety of English, different styles. Every author has their own style of using English. They have their own vocabulary. And each genre, if you like, has particular scenarios and a certain type of language. So the more they vary authors and the more they vary genres, the greater the variety of English they're becoming accustomed to and they're picking up. So reading is a wonderful way of improving mastery of English without actively studying it. You just absorb it if you do enough reading. With nonfiction, I'm talking about things like encyclopedias, newspapers, magazine, internet articles, and so on. Just try and make sure that the majority of what children read is in British English. Now, when it comes to the internet, that can be a bit tricky, because a lot of the English, the majority, I would say the vast majority of English that you find on the internet is American English. So you have to be just a bit choosy about that. Insist that your child speaks in sentences, expresses themselves clearly and accurately, and don't finish their sentences for them. Why is this important? Well, it is important because it's about communication. And if your child is going to do creative writing as part of their 11 class, it's especially important. Because although children can understand what they read, sometimes because they're accustomed and they've practiced a lot of reading and understanding what they read, so it becomes second nature to them and effortless. Unless they practice finding the words, stringing them together in a coherent way to express themselves, that skill is underdeveloped. And it is a skill. And like any other skill, it improves with practice. If your child doesn't get sufficient practice, then that skill is underdeveloped. What happens within homes, within families, is that we don't need to say our sentences. We don't need to find the exact right words, because we know what the other person means. And, for the sake of convenience and to have kind of comfortable relationships, very often we don't make the other people in our household say exactly what they mean. But for our children, that has consequences. Because of course, we're again trying to do something good. The consequence is that at home, they don't need to find the right words to express themselves. They don't even need to form a coherent sentence because mommy understands, daddy understands, brother and sister understand. But here's the problem. They get the same thing in school with their school friends, because most of the talking they do in school is with their school friends. They also don't have to speak in sentences. They also don't need to fight because their friends all understand each other. They have their own language that they understand. And then what they're doing is they're getting very little practice at actually finding the right words and stringing them together coherently in order to express what's in their head. And they're held back in terms of their self-expression. So being able to express yourself well is a life skill, but it's also important in some 11+ tests. So insist that your child speaks in sentences. I know it's a little bit of a pain and most people don't do it, but it forces them to wrench those words out from their head and verbalize them, and to actually think about how they start their sentence, knowing how they're going to finish it. These are skills and your child can learn them, and it's not learned in a classroom. Many people say to me, oh, Sir Taylor, can we have a vocabulary list, please? And my answer is always no. And they think, oh, that's not very good, is it? Actually, it is very good. And I'm going to tell you why. Because a vocabulary list is a lie. It's a deception. People who give you a vocabulary list for 11+, they're pretending to give you something useful when what they're actually doing is fobbing you off. Let me explain this. In the English language, there are over 1 million words. True that the vast majority of them are not used by most people. Because they're either archaic, or they're very technical, or they're scientific, or they only apply to a specific kind of work. True, but that still leaves a good couple of 100,000 words plus, which are general English. They're not specialist words. Now, so if I give you a vocab list of 1,000 words, you might go away and your child might spend hours and hours diligently learning those 1,000 words, thinking, oh yes, thank you very much, Mr. Taylor, because now I've got the vocabulary under control. But you know, that 1,000 words that they learned is a drop in the ocean of the English language. They might spend hours diligently, sincerely studying those words and learn them very well. And then they come to do a practice paper, or they come to do the actual exam, and they find that not a single one of those words was in that exam. Why is that a surprise to you? It should not be. So you might say, oh, well, surely then you can give us a bigger list. How many words am I going to give you then? Am I going to give you 10,000 words, 20,000 words, 30,000 words? Even if I gave you 30,000 words, which is, your child would do nothing but try and learn 30,000 words by rote. They would have no time to stop to eat. So it's not even practically possible to do, but in principle, if I gave you 30,000 words and your child managed to learn those 30,000 words by rote, and they know all the meanings of all of those words and what parts of speech they are, they could turn up for the 11+ and not a single one of them came up in the exam. Why? Because it's still slightly more than a drop in the ocean. Now it's a cup of water in the ocean. And that is why anybody who's giving you a vocabulary list for 11+ is actually fobbing you off with a lie. And that's why I won't do it, because it's a complete deception. Another reason why I don't do it is because that isn't a good way to be learning words. The best way to be learning words is by coming across them in context, i.e., when they're reading. Because when you come across a word in context, you see the manner in which it is used, how it's used, and how its meaning differs subtly, because many words which are not exact synonyms, they're approximate synonyms. So they're not interchangeable in every situation. So they learn a lot more about language, about vocabulary, about words when they come across words in context. So steer away from anybody who tries to give you a vocabulary list. Whether it's 1,000 words or 20,000 words, same principle. In fact, 20,000 words is worse, 20 times worse than 1,000 words. Because your child's efforts are going in the wrong place. You think you're doing them a great turn, and your child might think they're doing something wonderful for themselves when they're actually missing the chance to be doing things that would be much more beneficial to them, like a ton of reading. When it comes to learning words, you can't blitz it. You can't say, oh, okay, I'll learn 100 words today. You can't, because you just end up confused. If you've tried to learn a foreign language, which most people have, you'll know that if you try to learn too many new words at one time, they just get muddled in your mind. Much healthier to learn a few new words every day. For the children on my courses, I recommend them to actually add 3 new words into their vocabulary books every day, which is modest, but it accumulates, and it's the habit that's more important. And you yourself could develop your English and vocabulary. I mean, sometimes I hear parents say, oh no, my English is very bad. My English is not good at all. But, you know, you've got to be thinking, wait a minute, what kind of an example am I setting then? You know, because if it's good enough for mom and dad, you know, your child looks up to you. If it's good enough for mom and dad, it's good enough for me. You have to be a good role model of learning, of reading, of mind management, and a growth mindset, because your child is learning their attitudes from you. So it's not enough to say, oh, don't do as I do, do as I say, you know? So do as I say, not as I do. This is a common thing, and many parents try that, but it doesn't work, because your child looks at you and they say, well, I hear what you're saying, but I don't see you reading. I never see you reading, except maybe the instructions on the medicine bottle or subtitles on the TV. You don't see your parents sitting down reading a book. Why is that? Surely it can't be that important. If it's not important enough for my mom and dad to do, it can't be that important, right? So if you want your child to believe in persevering with efforts to learn, let them see a worthy example to follow. You must persevere with your efforts to learn. Choosing tuition, what to look for? Well, look for tuition that optimizes learning. Remember the 3 L's? The most important of them being learning, not testing. Lots of people emphasize testing and marks and what have you, and you think, yeah, numbers, numbers, numbers. I love numbers. But they're not the important thing. It should be about learning. The group has to be small, 10 or fewer, 10 or less, so that your child can interact, so that the tutor can identify and address and communicate individual learning needs and progress. So then you too can support your child learning, because you're getting some feedback and guidance to support your child. The group needs to be small. The moment you see a dozen or more children in a room, that should be a warning sign to you to walk away. The tutor must mark some of the homework, because it's when the tutor marks the homework, it gives them another kind of insight, apart from the interaction they have, another kind of insight into what your child has understood, what they've misunderstood, what they know, what they don't know, and what they could do to improve. You need that feedback, and your child needs that feedback. Ask if you come across tuition, how good are you? They all say they're good. I say I'm good too, but I back it up. I back it up with a money back guarantee, and I have always done that. It's a matter of principle for me. It's not about the money. I believe in what I do, so I back it up. Choosing tuition, run a mile if. In other words, these are the ones you want to avoid. If they pack more than 12 people into a room. When I say 12 people, I mean that includes the tutor, the pupils, any assistants, and what have you. Because if you have a crowd in the room, that's not about education. If they give a pretest before accepting pupils. Many times parents ask me, oh, Sir Tailor, would you conduct an assessment on my child before you take them onto the course? My answer is no. If somebody does conduct an assessment on a child before they take them, again, I would say, don't go there, don't send your child there. I'm going to tell you why too, because I think it warrants some explanation. One, what is it you think an assessment is going to tell you? A test. What is a test going to tell you? I'll tell you going to tell you? It's going to give you the scores that they achieved in the test. It's going to tell you how many marks they got out of 50, 100, whatever it was. It's going to tell you how strong or how weak their performance was in that test. It cannot tell you anything more than that. And all of that information, again, it's numbers. We like numbers. And because of numbers, we make a lot of poor choices. So these numbers pretend to tell you something useful and interesting, but they don't, because I'm going to tell you what is really important about a child if they're going to enter this 11 plus process. It's two things, and neither of those things shows up in a pre-test or a test or an assessment test. One, they have an aptitude for learning. And two, they have the attitude for learning, meaning they're receptive to it. So the two things that a child needs to bring to an 11 plus program is the attitude and the aptitude for learning. A child can be at a modest or even a low level now. For whatever reason, they may have missed school. They've all missed school, right? Because of lockdown. But sometimes children have missed school for other reasons. They may have been homeschooled. They may have been ill. There may be other circumstances. So they may have missed school. They may have been distracted from school by a million different reasons. You can probably think of some. For whatever reason, sometimes a child who has the aptitude and the attitude for learning is at a low level. Well, a pretest, all it's going to tell you is how well they did in that test on that day. It doesn't tell you the stuff that you actually need to know. So anybody who administers a pretest and tells you this is where your child's at is talking rubbish, quite frankly, because you can't measure where a child is at, let alone what they might be capable of. What is their attitude and their aptitude? So if somebody administers a pretest before teaching your child, they're pretending to tell you something. It's like back to, giving you a vocab list. They're just telling you something because they think it's what you want to hear. They want to appear to be doing something useful when they're actually not. I'll tell you another reason for a pretest. Even if the person administering the test believes that it's giving some useful information, some decisive information even if they sincerely believe that, you still got to run a mile. Because if they're saying, oh, your child needs to be at a certain level to do this program, then what they're really saying is, yes, your child needs to already know the stuff because I'm not going to be able to teach them the stuff. I'm not going to be able to teach them the syllabus. Okay? So again, it's not to do with teaching and education. It's a little bit like the grammar schools. By the way, I'm going to go back one because it's a bit like the grammar schools. The grammar schools, they select the most academic pupils. And then, of course, those most academic pupils who kind of showed some evidence of it by scoring well in 11 plus test, then they go on to excel in their GCSEs and often also in their A levels. And then the grammar schools take the credit for that. Well, that's what giving pretest is partly about too. It's about selecting the children who are already at a high level and then saying, oh, didn't we teach them well? If the tutor does not mark any homework, you got to think, what are they doing then? You do not have access to the learning, because I know for a fact that a large proportion of the parents of children on my courses dedicate a lot of time and effort to supporting their children at home, and it is necessary. Your child really benefits from it. I know that according to your circumstances, your opportunity to do that might be limited, and I totally understand that. But if you are in a position to help your child, of course you want to do that as much as you can. But if you yourself do not have access to the teaching, because it's the traditional model where they go to a room and the tutor teaches them and then they come home and then they have no more access to the teaching and you have zero access to the teaching, you've got one hand tied behind your back. Where the focus is on testing instead of learning, remember the 3 L's, or on volume of work instead of on quality of work. So again, the volume of work is like the vocabulary in the pretest. It's just pretending to give you something useful to keep you contented and feeling like you're getting your money's worth and the child is getting a good deal. They stoke up hype about techniques, test scores, CEMGL, test format, formats of questions in the test. It's just like the real thing, all that nonsense. And it is nonsense. Because what it does is it makes those things seem like the important things when they're not. Those are relevant things and they are all addressed, but they're not the big picture. They're not the important things. They're not the things that the children need to focus their efforts on, and they're not the things that you as the parent need to focus your efforts on either, but they pretend to be. So again, it's a distractor, and it usually is done by people who are not actually able to teach your child or not doing it. So they distract you with these things and make them seem important. A little plug for my own program. The values expressed in this presentation are my values, and they are encapsulated in my courses. We do use highly interactive small group format, small group meaning single figures. We work at optimizing our collaboration with you. I'm going to show you something just now to illustrate that. In fact, I should probably do it now because I might forget it in a moment. So I'm going to stop the share for a second, and I'm going to bring up the company's website. And I'm going to share that. Okay, so you'll no doubt recognize that this is the homepage of the Sir Tailor website. One of the things that's on the homepage, just going to enlarge it a bit. Okay, there's a button for apply now. I'm mentioning this in passing because we're here. We are opening bookings for our September courses. The 11 plus course is for the children who go into year 5 in September, so they're in year 4 now. And the foundation course starts right at the back end of September, is for children who will then be in year 4 and, well, of course, currently in year 3. Those will open on Friday, the coming Friday, the 30th of April at 4 o'clock. And if you want to apply, I would recommend you can go at any time now. Terms and conditions for those courses are on the website. You see here, it says 2021/22, 11 plus course. That's the one starting in autumn. And 2021/22 foundation course. So those are the ones starting in autumn. All the rest are the ones that are running now. They're the ones that started last autumn. Okay, so the terms and conditions are there. So if I click on 11 plus course, I see the terms and conditions in full of the 11 plus course. So I would suggest you scroll through those, have a look. And there's more too, because there's course information about each course as well. So if you go to the 2022 11 plus course, then what I've done here is I've said some things that I think is important for you as parents to know before you make a decision about 11 plus. And if you're going to put your child forward for it, then about tuition for 11 plus. Okay, so here's quite a lot of food for thought about 11 plus and about the course. And here, by the way, is the availability table. You can get to it straight from the top by clicking on availability table there. And what this shows is all the different slots that have been planned. So what day, whether it's a slot where the live lesson takes place in a physical room, or whether it's a slot where the lesson takes place via Zoom. So we have room slots for those who prefer that, and we have Zoom slots for those who prefer that option. On the far right, you can see those green buttons which say available. Of course, all the slots are available because we haven't opened bookings yet. Speaking of bookings, for existing clients, people who have a child on the course now, bookings open tomorrow morning. So we will get quite a lot of bookings tomorrow morning. And some of those greens may well turn red. But a few tends to be the more popular slots. They tend to get booked up quickly. Remember, we only have 9 children in a group. So sometimes a group can go from 0 bookings to full in a very short time if it's a popular slot. So here's something else for you to keep an eye on. So remember, existing clients, bookings open tomorrow morning. For you or people who are not existing clients, the public, in other words, bookings open at 4 o'clock on Friday. So existing clients have about 5 days to book their preferred slot, which I feel it's only right that I prioritize existing clients. Great, that's not what I wanted to show you. What I wanted to show you is that in the top right corner, if you go to the home page, there's that orange button which says login. Every pupil and the parents of every pupil are issued with a username and password, which gives them access to the company's website via that button. So I've just clicked on that button, and I'm now going to put in my own username and password, because using those, I can actually then log in as any other person. Now I'm going to log in as a pupil on the course. So this is a pupil on the current 11+ course. And when they log in, this is what they see. And by the way, you'd see the same thing. So what you see and what your child sees are pretty much the same thing. The reason I'm mentioning this is because within my presentation, I came to the point about collaboration, about empowering you. Because without you, there's only a certain amount that I and my team can do. So I'm trying to do the best for your child by empowering you, informing you, and giving access to all these resources to you. You have access to all of these things. There's a performance graph. This is based on scores that we collect for your child. There's 1 point for each session of the course so far. The current 11+ course, we're into session 23 now. So you can see that there's quite a lot of data here. Now, this child has been doing pretty well, quite consistently, mostly in the green. Green means they're on track. It means that they're doing the right things in the right way for the most part. There are a few points where it dips into the yellow, which is borderline, but those are few in number. Now, I'm always curious whenever there's a dip, like the lowest dip I can see after the initial session is here in session 17. Now, me being curious, I want to know why. Why did it dip to 70%, which is not absolutely awful, but I am curious. So you as the parent would also be curious. So, but you have access to things. So first thing you have access to is the record sheet. So remember, I'm logged in as a pupil, but you also have access to all of this same information. So you and your child have access to all of the information I'm showing you now. So there's the performance graph that you can just spot things that you want to get more drill down into, okay? So I'm interested in session 17, where the average score that week was 70%. So I go down to this online record sheet, which has all the scores in it that the learning coach, the tutor, I call them learning coaches, that the tutor has put in. And for session 17, that's the one I'm interested in. I see that this child added all 21 words that week. Remember, 3 a day, 21 words a week. So diligent for sure. And diligent every week, by the way. I noticed that this child is very diligent. Then when it came to tests done in class, he did pretty well. Look, 17 out of 20, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 85% overall on the tests. Oh, I'm looking at week 18, that's why. Sorry, week 17. The test scores here, he did do very well, even better actually, 19 out of 20 and 10 out of 10. So I already know where it is that this child has slipped up, because the other sets of scores which are here are for homework that the child has done, which has been marked by the tutor. And in that, he did very well on the first one, but half marks on this errata at 9 out of 18, 6 out of 10 in the English, 5 out of 10 in the maths, 1 out of 12 in nonverbal. Okay, now you, parent, me, learning coach, and your child, the pupil, can see exactly where there is an important learning need. And I would say the most pressing learning need here is that 1 out of 12 in nonverbal. So I'm curious, what was that because of? What is the actual learning need? So what you do is you say, okay, that is the session 17 nonverbal reasoning study test. Study tests are the homework that is marked by the tutor. Well, we go to the study tests button and we have a look. Study tests, you can see the gray ones, they're expired now because they were issued long back. The green ones are completed and closed. Session 17, here we go. Let's open up session 17. There's the English, there's the maths, there's the verbal reasoning, and there's the non-verbal reasoning. This is the one where this child got 1 out of 12. Let's take a look. Well, no surprise to me that it was cube nets. So this child has, so all the ones which are boxed are incorrect answers, and the ones which are ticked were correct answers. So this is the only question that this child got right, question number 10, and did not attempt question. This pupil asked a question. Okay, so as the parent, as the pupil, as the tutor, you can look at this and you can see that this, what was it that the child had difficulty with? It was cube nets. Now, just by looking at this, I know 100% that this child did not apply the techniques that I taught. Because sure, some of these 12 questions are tricky, but not 11 questions. Maybe 2 or 3 are tricky. So if a child is diligently applying the methods, the insights, the tricks that I have taught them, they should be getting 8 or 9 out of 12 at least. So that was page 2 of 2. This is page 1 of 2. And they're all incorrect on this page. So this child has just essentially guessed. They have not applied the technique. And the whole point of this was to practice what I have been teaching them. And I've even highlighted that on the sheet. Some of these are very challenging, but do not guess. You will improve if you instead practice using the methods taught. So this child, instead of doing that, has guessed. They probably did it off the top of their heads, hoping to get lucky, instead of reviewing the unit. So the tutor has said, review this unit and read the question carefully. Okay, review this unit. So now you think, oh, well, that doesn't really help, does it? Yes, it does help, because review the unit. How do you review the unit? Well, you can pull out the file and you can look at the worksheets and you look at the examples and what have you, but there's something much more powerful than that. And that is video lessons. So if we look at Cube, I'm searching in the Cube for video lessons on CubeNets. Okay, there are in fact 3 video lessons here which this child should review. There's one which is called CubeNets, which was issued in session 16. I'll just show you that that's me teaching the children about CubeNets. I won't play the whole thing, it's 12 minutes, I'll just play a little bit of it. One of the 3-dimensional types that can come up in nonverbal reasoning is making a cube from a given net. Now the net is normally given in this format, a T shape. The first thing I personally would look for when deciding whether a particular cube can be made from the given net is looking for alien shapes. Now what I mean is, if you have a cube, it has 6 square faces and it can have up to 6 different pictures. If I see on my cube a picture that doesn't exist over there, then I know that that cannot be a cube made from that net. That's what I mean by an alien shape. Now, if on my cube, if the pictures were literally the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and on my cube I see a reflected 2 or a reflected 6 or any other picture reflected, I know that that cannot be a cube made from that net. So hence alien shapes, including reflections. That's the first thing I would use to eliminate a wrong answer. Another thing is if there's wrong repetition. Now I said you can have up to 6 different pictures. That doesn't mean you will have 6 different pictures, because some of the faces of the cube could have the same picture repeated. However, let's assume that our net has 6 different pictures. If on one of the cubes I see repetition of the same picture, that means that that cube cannot be made from the given net. Or, for example, if there's a repetition of a picture on my net, but it's only twice and it occurs 3 times, then of course the cube cannot be made from the given net. So, okay, so that is just a quick taster for you of a video lesson. And I'd like to point out at this point in the current 11 plus course, there are 103 video lessons that the children can refer to at any time if they need to review something, and it's me, the author, the teacher, giving them the concepts, the methods, the tips, the explanations. Okay, so, and you, remember I'm logged in as a parent, but you, the parent, have access to all of the things that I've just shown you. And that is what I mean by collaboration and empowering you so that you can take as full a part as you wish to take. Okay, now I know I've overrun a little bit and we're very near the end, so I'm going to go back and complete my PowerPoint presentation. We work to optimize our collaboration with you, the parent, and I've just shown you some of the ways we do that. That's not all. I mean, I send frequent guidance, emails, I hold webinars for parents of children on the course, and so on, in order to try and help you to keep doing the right things, because you're busy, you just need reorientation. So I do that. My flagship 11 plus course is so effective that it comes with a money back guarantee. My foundation course is excellent stepping stone to the 11 plus course. That's primarily what I created it for. And we have live lessons scheduled to run in various locations, i.e. physical room lessons in Feltham, Slough, Hounslow, Cranford, Langley, High Wycombe. So it's all kind of West Middlesex and Berkshire mostly, but of course also at a computer near you, because live lessons, children can access them via Zoom, which does bring us to the next point, which is live lessons. You have two options, Zoom versus Room for the live lessons. The first thing I'd mention about live lessons is that it's the same course. It's not like, oh, if you do the Zoom course or the Room course. No, they are in fact the same course. And that whichever way your child accesses the live lesson, they're actually also getting the same live lesson. Another important thing to remember about live lessons is that the live lesson is not the course. The live lesson is a minor part of the course. I would say at most it's 25% of the course. But people do have strong preferences. So the distance learning, I call it course, but I just mean Zoom lessons. Some people prefer the Zoom lessons for convenience, you know, not having to travel, what have you, leave the home. It's safer, of course, because the child is in their own home under the parent's care. And of course, it saves time, it saves money, because it costs significantly less. If your child attends live lessons via Zoom, it costs you less because it costs me less. The standard course or the room-based live lessons, if your child accesses live lessons in a room, then some people prefer it because it gives greater scrutiny of the children and their work by the tutor. Because if I have a group of children in a room with me, one, they've got nothing else to do. They don't have the home comforts and home distractions. They're in a dedicated environment. So maybe they can concentrate better, some of them for sure. And I myself, I'm not seeing only the child's face, but I'm seeing the whole child. I can see the worksheet that they're using and so on. So there is greater scrutiny there. So, but of course that option is more expensive for you because it's more expensive for me. But it's a choice you need to make, and you can try on one way of accessing live lessons and then try the other if there's availability in a group. Why doesn't every child who completes my course qualify in 11 plus? I think you probably know that. It's because not every child is destined for grammar school, because they're very academic, and the 11 plus is designed to select out those children who are most academic. The test, in other words, is designed to get a spread of scores, and then the pass mark is set so that only about the top 25% qualify as eligible. Many times children come and they have been raised with poor mind management, or at least they're exercising poor mind management. They get anxious, they're lazy, they trick themselves, they take shortcuts, and they're interested in many other things other than learning. And then that fixed mindset is also part of that, because their parents and other people make it about scores and achievement and traditional outcomes. They have adopted a fixed mindset, which makes it very difficult for them to learn anything new. There is a lack of foundation. You know, I mentioned English is the most important subject. So if the standard of English is low, there's nothing I can do about that. English isn't learned in the classroom. I can suggest loads of ways for children to improve their English. And in fact, in this presentation, I've done exactly that. But they're the ones who have to do all the learning. Doesn't matter how good my guidance is, I can't do any of the learning. So a lack of foundation very often in English. Some parents are not in a position or not inclined to give support, and then their children get a bit less from it. Sometimes it's simply that everything else was right and they just had a bad day. Again, that's something I mentioned in the presentation. There are 1,000,001 things that are out of their control, out of your control, and out of mine. So it should not be a surprise. Very often, the children who don't make it, the vast majority of them, thank goodness they didn't make it. You should look at that as a very positive outcome if your child doesn't make it. Unless there were obvious reasons why they should have made it and didn't, then you've essentially done them a great service by not putting them into an environment which would have been disastrous for them. Now we come to the thing that you came for, the top 5 mistakes parents make Relearn Plus. You know, I pointed out some specific examples as we went through there, but I've got a different way of expressing them here. So I've put here well-intended but misguided, because of course I'm not criticizing parents. What I'm doing is I'm trying to inform and educate parents so that they can see the choices they make in a more informed way, and perhaps be empowered to make better ones. So I have no criticism of you. I'm simply trying to share these insights with you. So then at number 5, so we're going to count down to the most important. So number 5 is neglecting the primacy of English, logic, and learning, the 3 L's, language, logic, and learning. Now, what they do is they get caught up, hung up on relative trivia like CEM, GL, test format, mocks, practice papers, rote learning, written methods for arithmetic and techniques. All of those are relative trivia. And people who get hung up on those things and obsessed with those things, they forget the actual important stuff, which is the 3 L's. And they pay very little attention to those things. Big mistake. Number 4, diverting energies away from optimizing the 90% power at home. So of course, I'm here talking about the 50, 40, 90, 50% being the child themselves, and 40% the parent, and 10 the rest of the world. And what they're doing is, rather than attending to the 50% of their child and 40% power in their own hands, parents are looking to the outside world, schools, tutors, maybe even the government, to compensate for shortcomings in the 90%. Which of course is futile, because the amount of difference anybody else can make is relatively small. Suppressing a growth mindset and nurturing a fixed mindset by confusing working with learning. So when you say to your child, oh, go and finish your work, they think that finishing the work is the important thing. What's wrong with that, I hear you ask? Well, what it is, that finishing the work is not the important thing. It's the learning that they gain from doing the work that is the important thing, not the finishing of the work. And you might think, yes, well, obviously that's what I mean. Yes, it's obviously what you mean, but that's not obvious to your 10-year-old. Because they'll take literally what you say. Finish your work. So they'll go and finish the work. They're not necessarily going to learn anything. They're not necessarily going to finish their work and put thought and effort into it, because that's not what you said. So that's just one way of reinforcing or nurturing a fixed mindset. Also praising them for their achievements, praising them for getting a good score, praising them for passing and that kind of thing. Really be very careful what you praise, because you may be reinforcing a growth mindset, which is really handicaps their learning. Okay, so that's 5, 4, and 3. So now we're to 2, stifling the human and normalizing chimp behaviors by turning learning, especially for 11 plus, into an emotional event, in which process comparisons are particularly potent. So these are a couple of the ways that parents inadvertently stifle the human, because they think, oh yes, this is exciting, let's use the excitement to motivate my child. But what it does, again, the intention is good, is it turns it into an emotional event, when actually it's an intellectual, practical, academic event. And the more you turn it into an emotional event, the more likely it is that your child is going to react emotionally to the challenges. And they're going to react emotionally to the actual day of the exam, because you turned it into an emotional event. It stifles the human. And that comparison, please don't do it, because that really brings out the chimp and stifles the human. And number 1, what parents do is they lose sight of the big picture. That is, that the whole thing is about the flourishing of your child as a person. That's the big picture. And then what happens instead is that they succumb to 11 plus mania. You may have already tasted some of it, 11 plus mania. If you go to practically any other 11 plus tuition company, you'll get a good taste of it if you haven't already. So instead of remembering that this is about my child's flourishing as a human being, as a person, I want them to grow up fulfilled, happy, and independent. Instead, they succumb to 11 plus mania by letting it become about the school. They've got to get to this school. These schools are important. They've got to get into this kind of school or that school. The university that they might go to in the long run. Right, for now, the tutor. Who's the tutor? Who's the classroom tutor? Who is it? That's Mr. Taylor, if I send my child here, who's the tutor going to be? Who's the tutor? That's my business. That's my job. I train the tutors. I select the tutors. But you get hung up on that. The job. What job they're going to get, what profession they're going to get into, the money, how much money can they earn, keeping up with the Joneses, what are they doing? Wow, no, my child's doing this, or my tutor's doing that. Oh, their child's going to that school. All of that stuff, what that does, all of that, you get drawn into thinking that this is actually really important. And then what happens is that those are just means. Those are just means to your child's flourishing. They're not the ends. And what happens very often is parents lose sight of that. They lose sight of that. The means become the ends, and their child's flourishing suffers. So it all gets turned around, sort of, putting the cart before the horse. That frequently happens. And I'm trying to avoid that, or try to help you to avoid doing that. So here's the summary. We're right near the end now. Flourishing requires effective mind management and a growth mindset. 50%, 40%, 10%, that's the healthy perspective. Give due attention to the overwhelmingly important role of child and parents and the relative insignificance of schooling and tuition. The 3 L's, language, logic, and learning, are paramount in preparing towards 11 plus tests. Choose small group tuition that maximizes engagement and learning rather than testing. Now it's time to take action. I've mentioned it already. Bookings for our autumn courses are scheduled to open to the public at 4 p.m. this coming Friday, the 30th of April, and they open to existing clients tomorrow. Because of our small groups, some popular slots tend to become full quickly, so it would be prudent to secure your child's place promptly. Of course, you can do it many months later too, but by that time, choices might be quite limited about day and time. Help us to help others. If you like the values and ideas expressed in this presentation, please recommend us to a friend or few and mention it in your social media if you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, and so on. Many people do, I personally don't. I hope it matters to you and to your friends that we are not run for the purpose of accumulating profit, but to provide the best education and guidance that we can. I hope you've seen from today's presentation that that is in fact the case. And if you want to talk to me separately, privately, well, it's not quite private because it's recorded, but you can, specific queries, queries that are individual to you, you can ask me in a Zoom consultation. You just call us and say, I've been to Mr. Taylor's presentation and I would like a consultation, please. And they'll arrange it. Okay. Now, we have an autumn offer. I'll mention it very quickly. Any child who joins one of our programs now will qualify for the autumn offer. And that is whereby you and your child get access to all the worksheets and video lessons issued in the autumn term. That is an entire term from September to December without charge. That is an entire term's worth of learning. On the foundation course, that is £144 worth of resources for free. And on the 11 plus course, that is £309 worth of resources free. You would only pay for books issued during that period if you choose to buy them, but not for the worksheets or the video lessons. This means that a new pupil has free access to a whole term's worth of learning. End thought. Every parent has the chance to make the world a better place by the example they set for their children. What's the alternative? Thank you so much for your attention. I'm sorry I overran the 12. Stay well if you have to leave. I hope you'll be able to stay because we're now going to have question and answer. I request, please, that if you do have a question, keep it brief, end it with a question mark. So no speeching, please, or speechifying. And just ask the one question at a time. And if you have other questions, wait until others have also had their opportunity. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop the presentation. I'm going to stop the screen share. And I'm going to have a look to see if anybody has a question. I'll just do one more thing. Okay. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll do my utmost to say something helpful. Can you, well, okay, we have a hand, thank you. We, the name, by the way, you can change your name if you want, but I'm just seeing whatever name your Zoom happens to have. And the first questioner I see is Manit Rai. I've just enabled you to speak, Manit, so you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Hello there. So this is Manit Rai and Jagdeep Rai here. So one of the questions I have was,
Yes,
you've obviously got, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, sir. Please.
Sorry. So one of the questions I have was that obviously you've got reservations or preferences for the people who have done the foundation course.
Yes.
Will there be additional slots reserved up front to allow for people to book for the 11 plus course?
No, sir. Remember, the groups are small. The people who have put their child in for the foundation program, they've already committed that year to me, to my program, my company. So they've shown a great deal of commitment to the program. And obviously, the vast majority of children who are on the foundation course, it's because they want to benefit from the 11 plus program. So no, that's why they get priority booking for that 5-day period, sir. And then some slots, there's a fair chance that a small handful of slots will be full by the time I open bookings to the public. So the short answer to your question is no, there aren't any places that are held back from the foundation course pupils.
Sure. I was just curious, just wondering if there's like any additional slots that you provision up front, but if that's the case, but that's understandable. Now, thank you very much.
Okay, but in case, I will add to that, sir, that the vast majority, well, not vast, but definitely more than 50% of children who do the 11 plus course have not done the foundation course. So because the number of places available on the 11 plus course is far in excess of the number of children who are on the foundation course. So there is no possibility that that the 11 plus course will be full. So if your concern is that your child won't get a chance to get on the 11 plus course, no, I can reassure you 100% that won't happen. It's just that certain popular slots might be full, but the majority of places on the 11 plus course will be available. And I promise you that by the time Friday comes around and you can apply, the majority of slots will still have availability. Okay, so I hope that does help you. Right. Now we have another hand up, and the name on my screen is Sunny Chow. So I'm going to allow you to speak. So please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. It's been an incredible couple of hours listening to you.
Thank you, sir.
I come from the benefit of having had feedback from my sister. Her son went through your foundation course. He's now at one of the Slough grammar schools.
Right.
I'm now in my own position where my daughter, who's currently in year 3,
right,
will be going to year 4. So I just wanted to double check the course opening for the foundation course. Is that also open from 4 p.m. next Friday?
Yes, sir, it is.
Excellent. Okay.
So all you do is go to the homepage of the website, and there was a button. I didn't click it. I probably should have. But on the homepage of the website, there was a button which says apply now. If you literally click on that button, there will be instructions, step-by-step instructions of how to apply. But I would recommend that anybody from the public who wishes to apply, it's a good idea to consider your sort of second choice as well as your first choice, just in case, because what we do, that's you have the option on your application form when you're completing it to choose first choice and second choice. And if your first choice happens to be full, by default, we will allocate the second choice. Now, if by some chance your second choice is also full, we would give you a call to say, look, sir, this is the situation, but we do still have availability in various other slots. Would you like to change to one of them? But I think that come Friday for the foundation course, chances are all the slots would still have space, because it tends to be that the rush for bookings tends to be from the children who are on the foundation course, and of course they're booking the 11 plus course. So find 4 o'clock on Friday. I think you'll find, sir, that you have a pretty free choice of slots to choose from.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. Okay. Now, does anybody else have a question, a query? It can be anything. I mean, it can be something I didn't address at all, but something which is on your mind or something which you have heard. There is an awful lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about 11 plus, and a lot of that misinformation is generated by tutors who want to mislead you, because for them it's just a money-making scheme. I promise you, for me, it is not that. But they spread a lot of misinformation. And of course, parents are not the experts in this, and they're trusting what tutors are telling them. I'm telling you that some of the things that you hear from other parents, which they've heard from other parents who got it from a tutor, are not necessarily useful things for you to. So if you have anything you'd like to check with me, please, this is a great opportunity to do that. Okay, we have Srividya. Now, I wonder if that's the same Srividya that I know. I'm going to allow you to speak anyway. Srividya, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Hello, sir. How are you doing?
I'm all right.
Yeah.
Is it the Srividya that used to work with me?
Yes, sir.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. It's nice to hear from you. Where in the world do you live now?
Wallington.
Okay, all right. It sounds very pleasant. I've never been to Sutton, but it sounds very nice. So you've got another child coming up to?
Yes. So he's in year 4 now. As we do not have the non-verbal paper in this area, so right. If I would definitely want him to study with Sir Tailor's. My elder one, he's now doing his GCSEs this year.
Right.
So how do we go about it, since he wouldn't need the non-verbal paper?
Well, thank you, Srividya, for raising that question. I'm going to mute you just first, because I'm going to speak a little bit at length on this.
Okay, thank you.
Because I think other people might be wondering that too. Okay, thank you. Well, the course, the 11 plus course, teaches English stroke verbal reasoning, because they're actually the same thing, they're the language test. Maths stroke numerical reasoning, that's just maths. And non-verbal reasoning stroke spatial ability, that's just non-verbal reasoning. So those are the three subjects that grammar schools use. Now, what Srividya is getting at is that the exam she wants her child to try for doesn't contain a paper of non-verbal reasoning. So is it possible for her child to do only the maths and English aspects? Well, the short answer is no. The course is preparing children for, if you like, all grammar schools. And so all children have access to teaching for all subjects. Now, actually, the same question you just asked Srividya about, oh, but the test doesn't contain nonverbal. I would say two things. Well, three. One is that what the children learn about nonverbal reasoning is always going to be useful learning for them. It may not be necessary for 11 plus, but I think it's a thinking skill. It's a reasoning skill that is still a useful skill for them to learn. So learning is going to be interesting. They don't have to, if you like, spend a lot of time and effort on it. In fact, the nonverbal reasoning is the smallest syllabus of the three. And so it is a relatively small part of the program. That's another important point. Second thing is that I highly recommend, strongly recommend parents enter their child for more than one 11 plus test if they can. Okay, so maybe your first choice doesn't include nonverbal reasoning, but there may be another alternative, another option, perhaps, which does. Not necessarily in your case, Srividya, but for others who are thinking the same thing, consider that as a factor too. So I also want to add that I said that the course prepares children for all 11 plus exams, because we do in fact have children from various parts of the country. Mainly I refer to the schools, and my anecdotes are about schools in Slough and Langley, because that's the historical home. That's where I lived when I started the business. So that's where it was based to begin with. And that's still around that area where the room lessons take place in West Middlesex and Berkshire, and now just up to touching into Buckinghamshire too. But via Zoom, we have children who are in Surrey, Essex, Kent, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Swindon, Leicester, Leeds. These are just some of the areas that I can remember from which we have children doing the course. And of course, they are not doing the same 11 plus exams, they're doing various ones. And that's why my course actually covers all the subjects, because a pupil has the opportunity to learn all the subjects. Now, one little thing I must say, I say all the subjects, but every time I say it, I think, but I mustn't forget to mention creative writing, because I don't include creative writing within the course, the 35 planned sessions. The reason I don't include it is because the vast majority of grammar schools do not test creative writing. So I exclude that, whereas the majority do include maths, English, and non-verbal reasoning. But of course, there are exceptions. So for example, Srividya saying in Sutton, Wallington, they don't have non-verbal reasoning. I can think of another couple of examples. Tiffin currently don't have non-verbal reasoning. And now Reading School, a boys' grammar school in Reading, also have taken out non-verbal from their 11 plus. So there are examples of schools that don't have this subject. I recently became aware of the 11 plus format for the schools in Lincolnshire, which happens not to have a maths paper. It's just verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning. So around the country, 11 plus tests do vary in which subjects are included in the test. But the course does prepare children from all. So if you are going to prepare your child for a test that does not contain non-verbal reasoning, then all you do is let your child have the benefit of learning, but not to put emphasis and not to take time away from the work they need to do for the rest of the course. And if you like, just give minimal effort and let your child give minimal effort to that aspect. But if you do that, then you must tell the tutor. There was something I did not show you when I showed you the login, and that is, there was something I really should have shown you at that point. There's also feedback. So in addition to all those other things that I showed you, which is the performance record, the performance graph, the video lessons, there's also a two-way written feedback system directly with the learning coach, the person who teaches the live lesson for your child and marks their homework. That person, you have direct two-way contact with them, feedback, where they would give you written feedback guidance, draw your attention to things that you need to know about. And you can also draw their attention or seek clarification on something that you need clarity on. In there, be sure to inform your tutor that my son is not going to sit a non-verbal reasoning test in his 11 plus because I'm trying him for this school which don't have it, and therefore he will not be completing his work on please don't chase him up for it. If you tell that to the tutor, then everything is fine because they're not going to pester you and tell you that, oh, he hasn't done his homework in non-verbal yet again. Okay, so that's fine. Now, another thing I would say is this, that since your child is in year 4, and you're saying that non-verbal reasoning is not in the 11 plus, I'd say, whoa, 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 don't jump the gun. The 11 plus test and the admissions policies for your child have not yet been determined. They have been determined now for children who are currently in year 5. The children who are going to sit their exam this autumn, the exam's been set, the admissions policies have been finalized. But for children who are in year 4 now, all that information won't be finalized or may not be finalized until April of next year. In other words, a year from now. And I'll tell you this, you know, I just mentioned Reading School, which is the boys' grammar school in Reading. Up until this year, up until basically a couple of months ago, Reading School was part of the Slough Consortium. Within Slough itself, Slough-Langley, there are 4 grammar schools. And in Reading, there are 2 grammar schools. There's Kendrick, which is a girls' grammar school, and Reading, which is the boys' grammar school. So the 4 grammar schools in Slough and the 2 in Reading, they formed, if you like, the Berkshire Consortium. They all had the same test, literally the same paper, and on the same day. So a child would just sit that test once. They can't sit it in Reading and in Slough, for example. So they were a consortium, and their test was a test in English/verbal reasoning, math/numerical reasoning, and non-verbal reasoning, the standard. That's what it was until this year. Until a couple of months ago, parents have been preparing their children for TIFIN, and they've been going by their last year's admissions policies, and they got a shock. Sorry, for Reading, not TIFIN. And they got a shock when the announcement was there and the admissions policies were finalized for Reading School, and they are no longer in that consortium. Their test is no longer the same test as the grammar schools in Slough. They've got their own test now. And it's multiple choice English and maths and creative writing, no non-verbal reasoning. So some parents who were intent on their child sitting for Reading, now they've had to rethink. And I'll tell you something else that has happened, which please be aware, parents. You cannot go by this year's admissions policies for your child if they're only in year 3 or year 4, because admissions policies are reviewed annually. So if your child is now in year 4, the admissions policies for the grammar schools, all schools actually, are going to be reviewed once. before you know what applies to you and your child. So the point I was about to make is this, that there are some people who are pretty peeved right now because Reading has a certain catchment area identified by a list of postcodes or postcode sectors. And they've changed that. And some people, especially I think towards Langley side or SL3 side, who were previously in the catchment are no longer in the catchment for Reading. I'm telling you this so that you don't make important decision choices based on admissions criteria that don't even apply to you and your child. Unfortunately, this is just the timing of it. The admissions criteria that apply to your child, you don't get to know them until the spring term of year 5, which means partway through the 11 plus course, at least one term. And it could be as late as the end of April. By the end of April, all schools have to publish and finalize their admissions criteria. Some bring them out in February, some in March, and some might leave it till the last minute. Okay, so that is a very important point that Srividya has allowed me to bring out. Thank you very much for that question. Okay, now I'm just checking on the time because I think we're getting close to 1 if we haven't. No, we've got time for at least one more question. Okay, so if you have one, yeah, I see Sunny has another question, so I'm going to allow you to speak. Sunny, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, sir. It was just really a follow-on to what you've just said. So you mentioned that Tiffin doesn't do non-verbal reasoning.
Yes.
Are there schools that have specialist exams for which, I mean, say for example, does Tiffin have, or any other grammar school, would they have a specialist exam which your course doesn't cover
right.
in its basic format, but
right.
There are top-ups or specialist
I understand where you're coming from.
Study materials that can be purchased.
Thank you very much for raising that question, and I will address that now. Okay, the short answer is no. The long answer is this. The 11 plus tests for grammar schools, remember they are state schools. For the most part, when I say for the most part, I mean everything other than non-verbal reasoning. They are testing what children are taught in the national curriculum. So it's largely literacy and numeracy. So that is why they would all include a test that has some form of literacy in it. Even if they call it verbal reasoning, it's largely a test of children's language skills, their literacy skills. And almost all grammar schools will test numeracy to some degree. I mentioned in Lincolnshire, the 2 papers are called verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning. So there doesn't appear to be any sign of maths there. And yet maths or numeracy is included within that, because the kind of verbal reasoning that they do is the old GL verbal reasoning, which was really not a very good test, but it does include some types of questions which require numerical skills. So they are testing some numeracy even within that test. So literacy and numeracy is, if you like, the backbone of all 11 plus tests. And then some of them also test non-verbal reasoning, which is actually not taught in the national curriculum, or at least most of it is not taught in the national curriculum. So the odd subject out really is non-verbal reasoning. And yet most grammar schools do actually use that. I'll tell you the only subjects that grammar schools use, and I'm speaking from my own experience. All the grammar schools I know, I've heard of or read about use these subjects. They don't all use all of these subjects, but they use English stroke verbal reasoning. Both are the same thing. Math stroke numerical reasoning. Those are the same thing. And non-verbal reasoning stroke spatial ability, and no other subject. So some schools will use all of those, a lot actually, the majority. Some schools will use 2 of those subjects, but not the 3rd. But there is no school which is going to include something else in there other than numeracy, literacy, and non-verbal reasoning. Even the creative writing that I mentioned that only a minority of grammar schools use is just literacy. So it's not some other subject. But of course, writing, expressing is a different skill from understanding or comprehension. So it does require some attention. But it is still literacy. So the short answer is no. They all test numeracy, literacy, and nonverbal stroke spatial reasoning, and there is no other subject in grammar school 11+ tests. So I hope that is reassuring. So in fact, the course does prepare children for all 11+ tests. I mentioned creative writing is not part of the course. I should at that point have mentioned, I'm going to rectify that now, my omission, that creative writing, I offer it as an optional extra for those people who want it. So it's not kind of foisted on everybody, whether they need it or not, because only a minority of people do. And it is an optional extra. I normally conduct that during some of the school holidays. It is a workshop consisting of 5 3-hour sessions with some writing assignments that children do in between. And that is a very effective and powerful workshop, because creative writing, like with the vast majority of what is in 11+, is quite straightforward and simple. By the way, that is a common misconception put about by tutors, that 11+ is really hard, or it's really tricky, it's really, it isn't. You know, it's largely numeracy and literacy for 10-year-olds. So you have to ask yourself, just how hard can that be if it is largely numeracy and literacy for 10-year-olds? It isn't, it's simple, it's straightforward. The vast majority of it is simple and straightforward. People surround it mystique because it suits their purposes and it stokes up hype. I'm trying to do the opposite of that. The vast majority of it is simple and straightforward. What children struggle with is the volume of work, because they do need to do quite a large volume of varied practice. But the bigger thing that children struggle with is, you guessed it, it's English, because the one thing in 11+ that is not simple and easy is English. English, because it's a language, it's not simple. It's very complex, it's very sophisticated, and it's very big. That is the only thing I would say in 11+ which is genuinely complex and difficult. So yes, that wasn't a direct answer to your question, but it was important I mentioned about creative writing. Creative writing itself, again, lots of people big it up and they surround it in some sort of a mystique, but I can assure you, I teach this and I've been teaching it for a long time, very effectively, and it's very straightforward. Again, with creative writing, why do children struggle with creative writing? You know it, it's because their English isn't good enough. So the only thing tricky about creative writing is, again, the English. The only thing in 11+ which is genuinely complex and difficult. Okay, I'm going to see, there is time for just one more question if anybody has one. So if you do, you've got, oh, now we've got lots of questions. All right, so we've got several people who haven't yet asked a question. So I'm going to ask one of those. We have somebody called Chandra Jami, I think it says. If you please unmute yourself and ask.
Hi.
Hello.
You mentioned about grammar school is not for all the kids. So
Yes.
What is the alternative? Is it something we can think about the independent school also?
Yes, sir. That is a good question. Thank you very much. I'm going to mute you and address that point. So the question is, grammar schools are definitely not for 3 out of 4 children. Therefore, 1 out of 4 children, the most academic quarter of the cohort. So what's the alternative then for if your child is not cut out for grammar school? Well, grammar schools are state schools. You don't pay fees for them. They're paid for by the government. There are lots of other schools, the majority of schools in the country. I went to a comprehensive school in Bristol myself, and that's the default. So in most parts of the country, there is no grammar school. And so people tend to just send their child to their local school. And that's the most frequent and common alternative. But if you are fortunate enough to be able to afford a fee-paying school, a private school, an independent school, then of course that is an alternative. And they also have an entrance exam. So the independent schools have an entrance exam, which can resemble the 11 plus test for grammar schools, but they differ a lot. For example, most independent schools actually include creative writing in their 11 plus test or their selection test, but they don't all. I was speaking, I think it was yesterday. Yes, it was yesterday, to a parent in Bolton, Greater Manchester, who was telling me that she wants to try her son for Bolton School, and that's an independent school in Bolton. And I thought, oh, I'm not familiar with that school. So I Googled it with her to find out information that she needs to know about what does their test contain. And it was a multiple choice test in English, maths, and nonverbal reasoning, no creative writing. And that is an independent school. So independent schools, they tend to vary more in what their 11 plus test is. Many of them actually write their own exam because it saves money, right? They're businesses. So it saves them money. Some of them buy them in, some of them operate as consortia who share an exam and so on. So, but independent schools is an option if your pockets are deep enough. But of course they vary a lot too in what they offer, and you have to look at them. I mean, they're all individual, and you have to think, well, what would actually suit your child's learning needs? Because if they're not academically in the top quarter, then grammar school does not suit their learning needs. And then you're looking for an independent school where it isn't necessarily about, you know, exam results and excelling in exams being the holy grail. That is not going to be a good choice for a child for whom grammar school was a poor choice. So yes, those essentially, there are 3 choices, 2 realistic ones. 1, your local comprehensive school. That's what majority of people do. 2, an independent school if you can afford it. And 3, homeschooling, not recommended if you're a busy parent, because your child is going to lose out in a very big way because it takes so much dedication. Okay, so comprehensive or independent, if not grammar. Okay. Now we are 2 minutes away from 1 o'clock. However, I'm prepared to risk one more question if anybody has one. Okay, we have Renuka. So I'm going to enable you to speak. Please unmute yourself and go ahead. This is the last question now.
Hi, Sir Tailor.
Hello.
I'm Renuka. I'm attending the session from India.
Right.
So I have a question for my child
Yes.
who has finished his year 5 in India.
Yes.
And somehow this looks to be our last minute decision.
Okay.
So in case if I want my child to give an attempt for the grammar school exams, so is there any help from Sir Tailor to, fill in such type of requirements? Yeah.
Yes, madam, there is. And it's actually the, excuse me, the reason why I mentioned the autumn offer, because we do get children joining our programs, foundation course and 11 plus course at all stages, right up to the last lesson, in fact. And it's not unusual at all for children to come onto my 11 plus program in the last term or even the last few weeks. And they would get a lot of benefit from the program. So I already mentioned the autumn offer. So your son would have access to all the worksheets and the video lessons that we issued in the autumn term. That is a whole term. So if you like, the first 12 sessions on the 11 plus, it was the first 10 sessions on the foundation. He would have access to the video lessons and worksheets from that time. But of course, if he were to join now, we've had 23 sessions. This weekend, session number 23 of the 11 plus course is going on. If he were to join, let's say from next weekend, he'd be joining from session number 24. The whole 11 plus course has 35 scheduled sessions. So he would have missed the first 23, but he still has the benefit of the last 12 sessions. And the last 12 sessions are actually gearing the children up towards the exam. Up to now, what we've been doing is we've been teaching the syllabus, unit by unit, week by week. So we'll take a unit of maths, a unit of English, a unit of verbal, a unit of non-verbal, and we've been teaching that via video lessons, worksheets, online homework, and so on. And that's what we've been doing. But we're coming to the end of that phase 1 of the course, where we're covering the syllabus. And we're about to start phase 2 quite soon. From session 25, we're into phase 2. Phase 2 is where we're coaching the children in exam techniques and allowing them to review the vast amount of learning that they have already done, and to identify things that they didn't quite catch. So this would be an opportunity for your son to, rather than to review those, to actually just study them up thoroughly for the first time in a structured way. So a child joining now actually has a really golden opportunity to get the structured approach that we use, you know, unit by unit, and plenty of resources, actual learning resources. Practice resources, they're so plentiful, anybody can supply those, you can obtain as many of those as you want. But the actual teaching, that it's my teaching, and you can have access to that from the autumn term for free, and you can purchase the remainder of the video lessons if you wish. So there would be a lot of potential for him to gain. However, when a child joins the program late, I am always wary they should not feel overwhelmed, because there is a danger that if they're latecomers and then they've got a lot of catching up to do as well, so they've got the ongoing program to keep up with, which is itself challenging, largely because of the volume of work and the discipline required, not because the content is difficult. But so they've got the challenges of the ongoing program. They've also got catch-up work to do in parallel with that. So I'm always wary that I wouldn't want the child to feel overwhelmed by that, and he would need a lot of support at home to have a fair chance of coping. So first of all, I would also say he needs to be pretty academically strong, because if he's not, it would be overwhelming for him. So assuming that he's academically strong, then, and he has a good amount of support at home, then I think that he's got a fighting chance, madam.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Right, I'm sorry we're out of time. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but it is in your emails that the event is recorded, and it's recorded for the benefit of the many people who would have wanted to attend but were unable to attend. And I put it up on my website, and I also put it up on YouTube. So if you do want to mention to somebody who didn't make it today that, oh, you know what, that presentation, that would have really been worth your while to go to, say to them, go to YouTube and type in Sir Tailor, and then they will find this in a few days. It'll take me a few days to get it there. Thank you very much for attending. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I hope to speak with some of you again in the not too distant future. Bye-bye.